Harunobu describes his own teacher in Nagasaki, who told him that good timekeeping is not about control. It is about knowing when to let things unfold. Tokubai smiles at this. That, he says, is something ducks understand. As the week ends, the village faces a small crisis. The shrine's incense bell, which traditionally marks the beginning of each festival day, has gone missing. Preparations halt. The blacksmith is ready with lanterns. The cooks have simmered their broth. But no one will begin without the bell. An elder suggests delaying. Harunobu, checking his clock, offers a precise alternative. We can begin at exactly 6 bells past the morning sun. But the villagers hesitate. The moment feels off. They turn to Tokubai. He nods toward the river, where the ducks are pairing off on the smooth stones, a sign they only show when the light shifts a certain way. He closes his eyes and listens. Then softly he says, now is good. And that is when the festival begins. As paper lanterns flicker and soup bowls clink, Harunobu and Tokubai sit together on a bench made of worn planks. The ducks sleep nearby. Harunobu taps his clock once, then closes it with a sigh. It's still not as graceful as the geese, he admits. Tokubai raises an eyebrow. Nothing is. But as autumn nears, Harunobu begins packing to leave. His mission is to carry weather records back to Nagasaki. He's already charted wind patterns, bird migrations, and the strange way light falls through morning fog in mountain passes. Before he goes, he gives Tokubai a gift. It is a folded cloth pouch containing a tiny sundial made of brass. On the bottom is engraved, for when the ducks are napping. And Tokubai? He makes no grand farewell, but he sketches 2 small ducks at the bottom of a clean scroll, adds a note beneath. Ducks mostly agree with clock, especially near the equinox. He smiles and begins drawing geese, but as the days shorten, something peculiar happens. The ducks start disappearing earlier. The geese migrate without their usual farewell honks. And one morning, the pond is almost empty. Tokubai sits, waiting, but the time never quite comes. And for the first time he wonders if time still passes, but the ducks don't show it. What exactly is being measured? Would you like to continue to section 3 of Story 10? The winter of 1738 settles into Jimi village, not with snow, but with a silence thick enough to touch. The ducks, once chattering at sunrise, are gone. No waddling silhouettes by the river. No early splashes. No rhythmic honking from behind the reeds. It is not unusual for waterfowl to vanish in colder months. They migrate, molt, or simply move downstream to warmer bends. But this year feels different. Tokubai rises as usual. He watches the sky, waits by the banks, walks the familiar loops between cedar and pier. The pond remains still. The villagers notice his quiet pacing. The absence of the ducks becomes a kind of timepiece itself. A weaver comments, if Tokubai is not sitting by the water, it must be midday. A child says, it's nearly stew time. Tokubai hasn't moved since the fog. The man who once knew time through birds is now, strangely, becoming the village's own sundial. People begin to mirror him, his routines, his pauses, his long gazes. They imitate how he tilts his head to catch wind shifts, how he smells the soil, how he watches crows in the absence of ducks. In this silence, a new rhythm emerges. And then something else changes. One morning, Tokubai rises before the frost. He no longer waits for the ducks. Instead, he begins teaching. Not formally, there's no chalk or shrine lecture hall, but day by day, in slow conversations, Tokubai begins sharing how he really kept time all these years. Not by birds alone, but by what he calls the 7 slow signs: shadow, grain, how finely light filters through thatched roofs, water chatter, how different morning current sounds between stones, goat breath, when livestock breathe fog. It is still before dawn, smoke tilt, when rice husk smoke leans west, Breakfast ends, roof echo. The sound of feet on upper planks tells when dew dries. Moss scent. The smell of warmed moss underfoot tells of late morning. Dog direction. Village dogs lie in particular ways, depending on the sun. Each of these, Tokubai explains with the patience of someone who spent 40 years noticing what others ignored. He does not present it as wisdom, only as observations, quiet patterns, subtle clues. You have to listen, he says. Even when there's nothing to hear, the village begins to listen, not just to him, but to everything. Children start tracking the speed of ants on cold days. Old women compare the brightness of bean leaves to measure midday. One blind man claims he can tell time by the taste of air on his tongue, warmer, denser, or touched by smoke. No one laughs. Instead, a young apprentice writes it all down. Harunobu returns in spring. Is thinner. His traveling robe patched, his pocket clock still ticking. When he arrives, the villagers greet him not as a novelty, but as a friend. They show him Tokubai's newly written scroll, now titled, A Small Manual of Listening to the Hours. Harunobu reads it cover to cover beneath a plum tree. Nodding slowly, he offers Tokubai a gift, a folded paper fan printed with a circular map of seasonal winds. On the back, he writes, Time may tick or wander, but the moment always finds a witness. Later, that evening, as the sun dips low and shadows stretch over stone, Tokubai returns to the river bend, and there, just at the edge of the tall reeds, a single goose stands. It doesn't move, it doesn't honk. It simply stands. Watching him, Tokubai chuckles softly. Well, he says, I suppose you've come to check my math. The next morning, he places a small wooden marker in the soil beside the river. It bears no writing, just a carved image of two birds side by side looking in opposite directions. When villagers ask what it means, Tokubai says simply, the past watches the future, the present listens. In time, his scroll spreads quietly through nearby villages. It is copied, misquoted, elaborated upon. One local herbalist adds a morning frog chorus appendix. A carpenter from another province pens a skeptical commentary, but cannot resist including his own notes on owl calls. By the turn of the century, Tokubai's name has faded from the records, but fragments of his quiet science remain in poems. In festival toasts. In the way certain fields are tilled after goose season. You are standing there now, in your mind, where the river bends and a light wind touches the reeds. There's no ticking. No screen. No bell. Only the rustle of dry grass and the distant, familiar sound of wings. And for just a moment, you know exactly what time. The peasant who measured time with geese. Everyday science in Tokugawa, Japan. The year is 1738, and you are in the village of Jimi, nestled in the quiet countryside of Tokugawa-era Japan. There's no electricity, no glass clocks, number, ticking gears or standardized bells. And yet, the people here know what time it is. Precisely. Not the way a daimyo's retainer might with a lacquered watch imported from the Dutch, but well enough to plant barley in the hour of the hare, well enough to serve rice wine at just the right slant of afternoon sun, well enough to wake, wash, pray, sweep, cook, plow, nap, gossip, and sleep all on a rhythm as gentle as the rustling of paper walls in the morning breeze. In the center of the village is a man named Tokubai. He is not a priest, not a lord, not a samurai or merchant. He is a peasant of no special renown, except for one peculiar skill. He always seems to know what time it is, even when the clouds cover the sun, even when the birds don't sing, even when the shadows give no clue. People begin to ask, how do you do it, Tokubai? And he answers quite plainly, I watch the ducks. Now these are not ordinary ducks, nor are they sacred, symbolic, or specially trained. They are just village ducks. They live near the river bend and spend their days waddling, splashing, preening, and quacking in an utterly predictable way. Tokubai, who tends nearby rice paddies, has observed them for years. He knows, when the ducks begin their first morning bath, it is the hour of the tiger. When they cluster under the shade tree near the old well, it is approaching midday. When they vanish behind the tall reeds and reappear in pairs, the afternoon is ending. And when they perch one-legged on stone, silent and contemplative, the night bell is not far off. Charts their movements on a strip of mulberry paper. Morning waddles, midday stillness, evening pairings, seasonal molting. His calendar is covered with tiny ink ducks, marching across time. What begins as a private habit becomes, over years, a local reference. Farmers call out, "Tokubai, is it yet time to bring in the millet?" Mothers ask, "Has the duck perched? Then I must stir the mizo." Eventually, the village elder, whose own hourglass has become unreliable due to cracked sand, asks Tokubai to speak at the seasonal festival. There, in front of neighbors and travelers, Tokubai gently unrolls his duck scroll, pointing to various positions, all drawn in patient ink, and explains the rhythm of the days. The audience listens politely, then quietly, then intently. By the end of the year, several villagers begin keeping track of the ducks themselves. One weaver claims to have refined Tokubai's system with the addition of goose patterns, which are bolder and easier to see from her window. Another, a curious child named Chio, begins recording cicada song durations on rainy days as a backup method. The system evolves. It is not precise in the Western sense. It will never tell you 3:17 p.m., but it tells you when to turn the soil, when to boil water, when the visiting merchant is likely to arrive with salt and dried squid. Time, here, is a thing that breathes, not measured, but witnessed. It flows through ducks and shadows, into kettles and kitchen stories, down into the dirt. One traveling monk, upon hearing of Tokubai's duck-based timekeeping, visits the village and watches for 3 days. He leaves behind a single line, written in careful brushwork. 2. Measure with geese is not foolish if one listens well enough. This quote is later misattributed to a Confucian scholar, embroidered into a temple banner, and misunderstood entirely. But Tokubai doesn't mind. He still watches the ducks, still answers questions, still scratches little notes in the margins of his scroll, such as, "Ducks late today, rain came early. Might be vorms, goose pairing off again, slightly ahead of equinox. New duck ignores tree, maybe young or rebellious." By the end of spring, the local carpenter carves a small plaque and hangs it near the rice granary. It reads, in simple script, "Ask Tokubai the time, and he will ask the ducks." And yet, something stirs as summer approaches. A traveling scholar, carrying a strange device from Nagasaki, some kind of imported pocket clock, arrives with promises of precision and progress. Villagers gather to see it. They marvel at the ticking. They wonder at the tiny gears. They whisper, "Could time really fit in a box so small?" And for the first time, someone asks, "Tokubai, do the ducks ever get it wrong?" Would you like to continue to Section 2 of Story 10? Certainly. Here is Section 2 of Story 10. The Peasant Who Measured Time with Geese, Everyday Science. In Tokugawa, Japan, The Peasant Who Measured Time with Geese. Section 2. A Duck Disagreement. A pocket clock, and the science of shadows. The year is still 1738, and the ducks are confused. Not wildly so. Not flying in panicked circles or falling ill. But their usual patterns, so well known to Tokubai and the villagers, have shifted, just slightly. They rise a little late. They bathe a little longer. They ignore the old shade tree altogether, and it has not gone unnoticed. The scholar with the pocket clock, his name is Harunobu, sits cross-legged on a straw mat in the village square. He is patient, but precise. Twice a day, he opens the lid of his delicate silver instrument and checks the time. It clicks softly, ticks like a distant beetle. and shows the passing hours in Roman numerals no one else can read. Children gather around him. He tells them the hour, sometimes the minute, even fractions of minutes if they ask. The ducks, meanwhile, paddle serenely in the river. One waddles onto the bank and stares blankly at Harunobu, then turns and relieves itself next to a stone. The children laugh. Harunobu is kind but skeptical. You must understand, he tells Tokubai gently, that nature cannot always be trusted. Clouds move, shadows lie, ducks molt. He speaks in careful court-trained Japanese, occasionally sprinkling in Dutch terms he cannot quite translate. This device, on the other hand, he says, holding up the clock, was built by men who studied the stars. It runs on springs, not whims. With it, you can mark a journey, time a boiling egg, or write a poem in strict meter. Tokubai nods slowly. He is not threatened. He is not even particularly interested in being right, but he is curious. So they agree to a test. For 1 week, Harunobu's clock will be compared morning, noon, and dusk to Tokubai's duck-based readings. Each will write their predictions separately, seal them in little envelopes, and open them together each day. A young scribe named Hanayo is chosen to observe and document the results. She takes this job very seriously. On the first day, Harunobu predicts dawn at 5:18. Tokubai predicts it will come when the ducks gather at the base of the cedar tree. Both are correct in their own ways. On the second day, Harunobu's clock says it is noon. Tokubai notes the ducks are still sunning themselves and believes it is not yet midday. Minutes later, a breeze kicks up. The ducks rise and waddle inland. The bell rings. They were both a little early. By the end of the week, Hanayo presents the results in 2 columns. The clock is more precise. The ducks are more predictive, she writes. Diplomatically, the machine gives time. The ducks give warning. In one notable entry, Tokubai's ducks begin hiding beneath the pier a full 30 minutes before a heavy rainstorm. Harunobu's clock ticks on, undisturbed. This observation spreads quickly. Mothers begin watching the ducks again, just in case. Farmers hedge their bets, harvesting a bit early if the birds seem skittish. Even Harunobu begins to take subtle glances toward the water as he reads. New respect begins to grow between the two men. They talk often, and at length. Harunobu explains escapements and mainsprings. Tokubai explains shadows and soil temperature, and how goose calls seem to change before the full moon. They both admit that, in their own ways, they are trying to answer the same question. When is the young merchant who had overeaten dates and fallen dramatically off his donkey? Reported improvement within 1 hour, though donkey refused to be coaxed for 3 days. Another, meant to promote sleep, includes the comment, excellent, when taken during the second part of the night, caused vivid dreams involving rice and jurisprudence. The scribes tasked with copying all this begin slipping in small jokes. One entry for an especially bland digestive aid includes the margin note, tastes like boiled parchment. Effective, but deeply unromantic. Despite the laughter, the work is serious. Baghdad's medical guilds begin to standardize apprenticeship training using the index. A proper education now requires memorizing at least 60 syrup types, understanding humoral theory, and being able to prepare a syrup blindfolded. Though this is more for show than safety, there's even a syrup examination. Candidates must identify unlabeled mixtures by smell, describe their use, and explain why a patient with liver heat and poetic fatigue would prefer syrup 172B to 143A. The final test? Convince a senior physician to drink one of your own syrups and report how it made him feel. Reactions vary. Some are impressed, others sleepy. One old doctor bursts into tears and insists it reminded him of his childhood and a particularly fragrant goat. Pass or fail, it's all part of the record. But behind the flourishing syrup culture, a quieter story unfolds. Ibn al-Nadam, the compiler, has grown older. His once clear handwriting now shows slight tremors. He no longer visits every apothecary in person. Instead, he sends trusted apprentices armed with wax tablets and sugar dates to bribe resistant shopkeepers. Still, he reviews each new entry. Each correction. Each marginal joke. The index has become more than a list. It's a portrait of a city, its humors, its habits, and its sweet, sticky way of dealing with pain. And yet, one question continues to plague him. A question that has appeared again and again in physician debates, in scribal arguments, and in his own quiet thoughts. What do you call a syrup that doesn't do anything, yet still makes people feel better? Would you like to continue to Section 3 of Story 9? Certainly. Here is Section 3 of Story 9, The Apothecary's Index. How medieval Baghdad organized 800 kinds of syrup. By the year 932 CE. Baghdad is changing. The scholars still gather. The apothecaries still hum with warm, resinous air. But politics has grown unpredictable. A new vizier has arrived, young, pious, suspicious of luxuries. The House of Wisdom is no longer immune to scrutiny. And yet, amidst all this, the syrup makers endure. They continue to stir, strain, and label, reassuring themselves that their craft, however humble, still holds value. That a well-made cordial can ease a cough, soothe a mood, or simply make someone feel that they've been seen. But there is one syrup that no one can quite explain. It appears in Volume 4 of the Reliable Index, nestled between a digestive syrup made with pickled turnips and a stimulant once used for sluggish scribes. Its name is understated. Syrup No. 441. Pale, cooling, slightly sweet. Its listed effects: promotes mild cheer, causes no harm, useful when other treatments feel too sharp. There's no record of its origin. No named physician attached. No dramatic case study. Just a few soft lines in the margin, given to a homesick cook. Helped him sleep, drunk daily by a widow, despite no illness. Requested frequently by a scholar with no clear complaint. What's in it? The recipe is short. Water from barley boiled thrice, a touch of violet syrup, 2 drops of rose water, a shaving of dried quince peel, and a whisper of mint. If the air is dry, nothing here fights infection. Nothing here cures the spleen. And yet, Ibn al-Nadim adds it to the index. Why? Perhaps it's the quiet that attracts him. The syrup does not boast. It doesn't change moods dramatically or claim to rebalance the elements. It's just there, gentle, thoughtful, present. In a time when apothecaries are naming their blends. The grand harmonizer of the inner stars, or melancholy banisher. No. 7. This syrup simply offers mild cheer. It becomes quietly popular. Not among the elite who want fast results, but among scribes, grandmothers, young students, and people who aren't sure if they're sick or just tired. One apothecary begins offering it as a free sample. Another stocks it near the door for evening shoppers. It becomes known only half-jokingly as the syrup you give when you don't know what else to do. This, of course, raises philosophical questions. One physician, clearly annoyed, writes a treatise titled Against the Placebo Syrups, accusing his colleagues of confusing kindness with science. But others defend it. A doctor from Basra writes, if it harms no one and comforts many, is that not medicine still? And Ibn al-Nadim himself, never one for public argument, adds a new line beneath the syrup's entry. Offered in moments of uncertainty, causes no fire in the stomach, tastes like something remembered. That line is underlined in later copies of the index. By the mid-10th century, the syrup index is spread far beyond Baghdad. Scribes in Fez create their own adaptations, changing ingredients to match local flora. A Jewish scholar in Cairo adds cinnamon and cardamom to his regional version. In the libraries of Cordoba, a copy of the index is discovered to have tiny musical notes next to certain entries suggesting syrups once meant for singers have become part of court entertainment. And yet, syrup no 441 remains in nearly every version unchanged. It becomes, oddly, a kind of touchstone. Apprentices are asked about it during final exams not because they need to reproduce it, but because their attitude toward it reveals something. Do they scoff? Do they sigh? Do they perhaps understand? Ibn al-Nadim dies in his sleep during the spring of 941. His funeral is modest. Among those attending are a former scribe, now a syrup vendor, a nervous singer who swears by syrup for voices in the key of D, and a cook who once drank something gentle and pale to help him sleep in foreign city. The index is preserved, copied, debated. Over the centuries, it will be lost and rediscovered. The recipes will shift. Some will vanish. Others, oddly, will survive. But syrup no 441, humble, cooling, slightly sweet, continues to appear. Even in places far from its origins. It is found in a 12th century Andalusian household guide. In an Ottoman-era notebook on gentle restoratives. Even in a French herbalist's translation from the 1600s, where it's simply labeled syrup serene for comfort when one needs nothing in particular. And so, as you step away from the apothecary's shelves, you might remember that not every medicine must cure. That sometimes doing no harm and offering something mild, thoughtful, and utterly unremarkable can be its own kind of wisdom. Especially in a city as busy as Baghdad, especially on a warm night, especially when the moon is up, the streets are quiet, and someone somewhere is still stirring syrup. The Apothecary's Index. How medieval Baghdad organized 800 kinds of syrup. The year is 920 CE. You're walking through the heart of Baghdad's medical quarter, the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, just after the mid-morning call to prayer. The air is rich with the smell of ink, beeswax, and fenugreek. Somewhere, water trickles from a tiled fountain. A scribe's reed pen scratches quietly. And someone is boiling something sticky in a copper pot. That would be syrup, and it's not just any syrup, it's sharab fafaloon, a preparation involving wormwood, quince, and just a touch of powdered lapis lazuli. You wouldn't drink it, not without a prescription. But the caliph's physician says it's excellent for restoring a melancholic temperament and reducing nosebleeds related to excessive reading. The caliph is prone to both. This is a golden age of quiet organization across the Islamic world. Scholars are translating Greek, Persian, and Indian medical texts into Arabic. Some are adapting them, others correcting. In Baghdad, where commerce meets curiosity, the city's physicians are pushing forward with something altogether different. They are trying to organize medicine not just by illness, not just by ingredient, but by taste, texture, color, heat, and behavior. A patient walks in complaining of dry cough, headaches, and nervous exhaustion. They won't just get an herb, they'll get a syrup suited to their humoral type, their stomach's temperament, and whether or not they own a parrot, believed in at least one marginal note, to affect mood and bile. This effort requires a lot of syrup, hence the index. The Al-Firist al-Mu'tamad, or the Reliable Index, is compiled by a man named Ibn al-Nadim, not to be confused with the famous bibliographer of the same name, though they may, in fact, be cousins. His goal? To catalog every known medicinal syrup used in Baghdad's major apothecaries, with notes on how long they can be stored before they start to smell like bad vinegar. Each syrup entry includes name, known properties, color, in daylight and lamplight, recommended shelf position, top shelf for dry lungs, bottom for sluggish bile, interactions with poetry, wine, and raw garlic, acceptable substitutions in case of invasion, drought, or stinginess, and of course, the price in diners per finger width. But this is not just a cabinet of curiosities. It is a matter of state. A poorly prepared syrup could sicken the vizier. A mislabeled mixture could embarrass the entire House of Wisdom during a royal visit, and so protocols are developed. Young apprentices learn to prepare syrups under moonlight only, if the herb is believed to shrink when watched. Others must be stirred clockwise if the ailment is cold and damp, counterclockwise if hot and dry. The consistency is judged by how slowly it slides down a fig leaf. The best syrup makers become minor celebrities. Their tools, bone-handled ladles, silver syrup spoons, and measuring cups etched with tiny lions are passed down like relics. At the peak of the season, Baghdad's apothecaries may have over 800 distinct syrups on file, labeled in everything from Arabic calligraphy to early Persian shorthand. It is, in many ways, a triumph of taste over chaos. Still, not all is smooth. One persistent problem: syrup fraud. Unlicensed vendors sometimes thin their mixtures with honey water, add saffron to disguise spoiled batches, or forge copper labels claiming endorsed by the caliph's physician. To counter this, the city implements a tasting bureau. Random samplers, usually junior scribes with reliable tongues, make unannounced visits, sipping spoonfuls and filing reports. Some syrups are too sour, others suspiciously sweet. One memorable case involves a calming draft that turns out to be date syrup mixed with crushed almonds and, inexplicably, peppercorns. The culprit insists it's for dream enhancement. The Syrup Bureau is not amused, but fraud is not the only problem. Sometimes the issue is over-enthusiasm. Physicians, eager to outdo one another, begin inventing ever more elaborate syrup names. The dew that calms the 11th nerve, preparation for the harmonization of morning spirits, golden quietude, especially for lentils. At one point, a small dispute breaks out over the naming rights to a syrup that treats melancholy induced by lunar poetry. A compromise is reached. Both doctors will share credit, and the syrup will be renamed Night Ink No. 3. Still, for all the bickering and bureaucracy, something remarkable is happening. For the first time in centuries, a major city is treating medical knowledge not just as lore, but as something to be classified, preserved, and most importantly shared. Travelers from Cordoba return home with index scrolls. Persian scholars add commentary in the margins, noting local substitutions for pomegranate syrup in colder climates. Even in Cairo, rival physicians begin citing Baghdad's syrup charts, grudgingly admitting that the organization is commendable if the recipes are a bit indulgent. And the caliph? He continues to have nosebleeds, but he is comforted, perhaps, by the knowledge that somewhere in the House of Wisdom, a syrup labeled C24, thick, cool, for nose and mood, is always waiting, carefully shelved, lovingly stirred, and just slightly sweet. You find yourself once again in Baghdad's medical quarter. It is now late spring. The air is heavier, and the apothecaries have begun their seasonal shift, shelving the warming syrups of winter and making space for the cooling remedies of summer. There is a rhythm to it. Each bottle, vial, and clay pot is assigned a spot, not just for inventory's sake, but based on its elemental behavior. Cold syrups belong on the north wall, hot ones on the southern, moist to the west, dry to the east. And if the shop has no such orientation, a painted compass rose is installed on the ceiling, so no one gets confused when treating a damp spleen. It's all very organized. One of the more diligent apothecaries, Mahmoud Ibn Tariq, has a reputation for labeling everything to absurd degrees. His shop is small but legendary. The labels on his shelves are written in beautiful Kufic script, and they do not merely say cough syrup or elixir of figs. They say, for a cough that echoes in the night and frightens small birds. Or, for the third kind of heartburn, as described by Galen but caused by mulberries. Mahmoud keeps a separate syrup guidebook for apprentices, helpfully annotated with drawings. A sneezing camel here, a sad fish there, and always a side note reminding the reader, not for babies or philosophers. His best-selling syrup? The Laughing Cordial, made with rosewater, cinnamon, and an infusion of bitter orange peel. It was originally intended for mild sorrow brought on by political debates, but found popularity with poets, brides, and nervous musicians. Musicians, in fact, were an unexpected clientele. By the mid-1920s, a minor trend develops: syrup-enhanced singing. It begins when a court musician, plagued by stage fright and a twitchy throat, drinks a warm syrup made of fennel and jujube before performing at a private dinner for a visiting scholar from Kufa. The performance is described as haunting, serenely nasal, and unexpectedly confident. The next day, half a dozen young performers crowd Mahmoud's shop asking for the haunting syrup. Mahmoud, ever the businessman, creates a new blend, syrup for voices in the key of D. Its real ingredients: mulberry, honey, thyme, and 2 drops of aged vinegar. Just enough zing to sharpen the throat, and just enough sugar to calm the nerves. Soon, there are rival syrups: throat of the peacock, the singer's spoonful, cordial for harmonious breath under audience pressure. At least one noble house attempts to patent a formula, which prompts the House of Wisdom to step in and declare music syrups a matter of public well-being. Apprentices now hum scales while stirring mixtures. It is a very musical time. Meanwhile, the index itself keeps growing. What started as a slim catalog becomes a multi-volume affair, copied by hand and bound in dyed leather. Each entry now includes usage anecdotes, brief case notes collected from physicians across Baghdad. One syrup, designed for stomach cramps, is described in price controls were a double-edged sword. The government feared inflation, but it also feared disorder. Riots weren't uncommon. In bad years, food scarcity could lead to genuine unrest. To avoid this, the Bakufu relied heavily on merchant self-regulation. Keep prices low, but stable. Supply food, but don't profit too loudly. So when whispers of a cabbage riot began circulating, allegedly involving several irritated grannies wielding soup ladles, the government acted. They didn't dissolve the guild. They did something worse. They ignored it. With no official backing, the guild was left to enforce its rules through reputation alone. No magistrates, no raids, no exclusive access to the auction houses. Suddenly, being a member of the Cabbage Guild meant nothing more than sitting in a cold room and talking about cabbage. Some tried to adapt. One older merchant attempted to create a new certification process involving colored TASSELS. Another hired a kabuki actor to perform a monologue praising the honest crunch of licensed cabbage. Both efforts were mocked mercilessly. The market moved on. Buyers began purchasing directly from small farms. Vendors formed quiet alliances. Cabbage moved freely again, sometimes too freely, as prices dropped and small-scale farmers struggled to keep up. But the worst had passed. By the time spring arrived, the market had found its balance once more. Still, the effects lingered. The guild fractured. A few diehards continued meeting weekly, sipping barley tea and muttering about the good old barrels. Others reinvented themselves as cucumber specialists. A handful of former inspectors, out of work and inexplicably well-fed, opened a small izakaya named the Pickled Gate, which became famous for its all-night stews and suspiciously good side dishes. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was social. Cabbage had changed. It was no longer just a vegetable. It was a symbol of quiet rebellion, of everyday resistance, of the limits of control. And in a society as orderly as Edo's, that was no small thing. By the end of the year, no one spoke of the cabbage wars directly. But people remembered. They remembered the shortages, the raids, the labels, and the strange weeks when cabbage was waved like silver and sold like gossip. They remembered how the city had adapted, not with violence, but with cleverness, quiet defiance, and a deep-seated love for pickled things. It is now 1732. The frost-bitten winter that once sparked the cabbage shortage is a fading memory. But in its place, something unexpected has taken root. Not rebellion, not revolution. Just vegetable reform. Edo Vegetable Market had always been a place of structured chaos. Barges floated in at dawn, stacked high with leafy greens, roots, and crates made of split bamboo. Porters offloaded produce with the rhythm of habit. Tea girls moved between stalls with kettles slung from wooden yokes. It was all predictable until it wasn single quotes G. After the collapse of guild power, a slow transformation began. The term jiu yasai, free vegetables, entered the urban lexicon. Vendors began using it in handwritten signs, often decorated with cheerful radish drawings or poems in bad calligraphy. One popular haiku read, "No seal, no scroll here, just crunchy leaves and cool wind in my soup tonight." It was corny. It was silly. But it worked. The tone had shifted. The city magistrates, ever keen to maintain order without appearing to lose face, began formalizing what the people were already doing. A new regulatory body emerged, not a guild, but a market. Advisory office, filled not with elite wholesalers, but with a rotating council of farmers, vendors, and even 2 housewives. Their goal was not to fix prices, but to prevent chaos during shortages and ensure food safety during times of glut. There were meetings, debates over decon measurements, charts about moisture content. It was, in a word, boring, but it was also a revolution. One of the former guild elders, Mr. Yamamura, was invited to join the council. He declined, choosing instead to retire to the countryside and grow green onions. His memoir, My Life in Leaves, A Gentleman's Guide to Seasonal Produce, sold reasonably well. In it, he described his regret not for the fall of the guild, but for failing to recognize that cabbages, like people, refused to be managed too tightly. It was a subtle jab at his old colleagues and at himself. His parting advice? Respect the rhythm of the market and never underestimate a housewife with a pickle barrel. Meanwhile, the urban vegetable scene flourished. Pickling shops began experimenting with new flavors, adding yuzu peel, shiso leaves, and even mild chili. Street vendors developed new snack versions of pickled cabbage, folded into rice paper rolls or served alongside steamed buns. One clever entrepreneur created a traveling pickling cart, offering on-the-spot fermentation services. Housewives brought their own jars and cabbage. The cart owner supplied the salt, the kombu, and some light gossip. The black market stigma faded. The underground cabbage sellers of yesteryear were now respected elders in their neighborhoods. One was even elected to a local shrine committee, and no one, not even the magistrates, bothered with wax seals anymore. Yet the memory lingered. In bedtime stories, grandparents told of the great cabbage freeze and the whisper raids. Children laughed at tales of cabbage disguised as firewood. A local playwright staged a comedic drama titled The Pickled Conspiracy, which played to packed houses for 6 months. The vegetable wars were remembered not as tragedy, but as farce. And maybe that too was a victory. As you walk the quiet streets of Edo now, the scent of grilled scallion and simmered broth floats in the air. Paper lanterns sway. A vendor snoozes beside a cart full of green leaves. Somewhere someone is biting into a cold, crunchy wedge of cabbage. You pass a tiny shop tucked beneath a wooden awning. Its sign reads, "No seal, no stamp, just crunch." Inside, an old woman smiles and says, "You're just in time. The pickles are ready." You nod, you bow. And you realize that in this city of rules, it was the humble vegetable that brought about the most human kind of change, slow, persistent, and Story 8, a little bit salty. Wars of Edo. Vegetable monopolies and midnight raids. You are in Edo, Japan in the early 1700s. The city is quiet, blanketed in the sounds of distant temple bells, straw sandals whispering over the street, and the shuffle of wooden carts. A cat hops from a rooftop. Somewhere a lantern creaks in the breeze. You are not a samurai. You are not a poet. You are a vegetable wholesaler. And the fate of the city's cabbage prices depends, somehow, on your ability to stay awake. To understand how this came to be, we must return to the Tokugawa period, a time of relative peace, rigid social order, and immense bureaucracy. Edo, now Tokyo, had become one of the largest cities in the world, swelling to over 1 million inhabitants. Samurai roamed the streets, yes, but so did merchants, apprentices, fishmongers, rice polishers, and critically vegetable brokers. Cabbage, at this point in history, was not the round-headed kind you're imagining. It was a looser, leafier variety, Napa or Hakusi, closer to what we might call Chinese cabbage. It was crunchy, filling, and ideal for pickling. Housewives packed it into barrels with salt and kombu. Tea houses served it alongside grilled sardines. It was the unofficial food of the common man, and like anything common and useful, it soon became the subject of intense regulation. The Tokugawa Bakufu, the military government, believed in control. It organized society into 4 rigid classes: samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Merchants were considered the lowest, but ironically, they were often the richest. In the case of cabbages, the Bakufu saw a chance to limit economic chaos. They established a guild, the Yasai Tonya, a vegetable wholesaler monopoly. Membership was limited, usually passed down by family. These men, usually older, sleepy-looking gentlemen in earth-toned robes, were granted the right to sell wholesale vegetables to retailers throughout Edo. You could not simply bring a cart of cabbages into the city and sell them to your neighbors. That would be chaos. No, you had to go through the guild. Pay your fee, follow the rules. And the rules were many. At dawn, guild members met at the vegetable auction hall near Nihonbashi. There, standing between towers of stacked produce, they negotiated the going prices for dozens of vegetables: cabbage, daikon, burdock root, taro, leeks. But cabbage was king. Why? Because it was lightweight, profitable, and had become essential for winter food storage. The price of cabbage could affect the price of rice. Indirectly, if a household filled their miso soup with more cabbage, they might buy less rice. More cabbage meant less grain demand. And less grain demand affected taxes, which were often measured in rice. In this way, a humble leafy green held sway over economic policy. So when a particularly good harvest flooded Edo's market with cabbages, the guild panicked. Prices dropped. Profits plummeted. And so the guild, with its aging hierarchy of wholesalers and whisper-thin margins, did what any powerful trade group might. They began fixing prices. They agreed not to sell below a set value. They ordered surplus cabbage to be hidden or destroyed. In one case, entire shipments were quietly sent back upriver under cover of darkness. But farmers, not members of the guild, grew restless. Some farmers, especially those living near the edges of Edo, decided to take matters into their own hands. Under moonlight, they loaded their carts and smuggled cabbage into the city, selling it directly to local vegetable vendors in small back alleys. These vendors were thrilled. Cheaper cabbage meant happier customers, more tsukemono, more soup, more pickles. But to the guild, this was heresy. They called them yami-uri, dark sellers, and demanded that the city magistrates intervene, and thus began what would later be referred to in dry government records as the Kokoshin Yasei Jiken, or the unauthorized vegetable incident. It would last for months, night after night. Guild informants, often posing as delivery boys or umbrella repairmen, patrolled side streets looking for signs of illegal cabbage, a dropped leaf in a gutter, an unusual smell, a stall opened too early. Raids followed. Punishments ranged from fines to temporary exile. A few unlucky vendors were shaved and forced to sweep the marketplace for a week as public examples. Still, the underground cabbage trade flourished. Enterprising housewives began trading gossip about the best back alley sellers. "Go to the alley behind the udon shop," they whispered. "He sells at sunrise. Bring your own wrapping cloth." Children ran messages between buyers and sellers, using codes involving drawings of turnips and clouds. The guild tried harder. They offered certified Cabbages with an official seal pressed into wax and tied with hemp string. They launched a marketing campaign, claiming Guild cabbage was safer, cleaner, and had more crunch. But even with certification, the price gap was too wide. One old woman reportedly muttered, "A cabbage is a cabbage. I don't need a samurai to bless it." The authorities cracked down again. This time, the raids turned comical. In one notorious case, a group of magistrates surrounded a bathhouse after hearing rumors of illegal cabbage hidden in the furnace room. After 3 hours of searching, they discovered only a barrel of sauerkraut and an embarrassed apprentice. But the message was clear. The vegetable wars were real. By the time spring arrived, things had calmed. The guild softened its stance quietly, lowering the minimum price. A few rogue sellers were quietly allowed to join as junior members. The farmers returned to their fields. The cabbage returned to its rightful place on dinner tables. But the incident was not forgotten. Edo citizens had seen firsthand how a vegetable could disrupt an economy and how little the law could do to stop the quiet midnight hunger of a city. And so as you walk the streets of Edo tonight, you may hear only the wind and the crackle of oil lamps. But beneath the calm surface lies a city still shaped by vegetables, still organized by pickles, still remembering a season when cabbage became currency. And if you were to ask an old grocer why he stores his cabbages in a locked wooden chest, he might just say, "Better safe than raided." Winter crept into Edo not like a storm, but like a polite official, steady, proper, and a bit overbearing. The air grew crisp. Tatami mats crackled underfoot. The Sumida River iced at its edges. Fish prices climbed. Lanterns burned longer. And pickled cabbage, that unassuming backbone of the commoner's diet, became more valuable than ever. For the Vegetable Guild, it was an opportunity to reclaim control. The guild's inner circle, an elite group of about 20 men, all over the age of 50 and deeply committed to wearing beige, gathered in a tatami room behind the auction hall. They did not shout. They did not argue. They sipped barley tea and tapped on their abacuses like monks contemplating a riddle. What they faced was this: the black market cabbages had not gone away. If anything, they had become more brazen. Entire alleys now operated as semi-legal vegetable zones, where the smell of Napa wafted like incense. And worse, some younger guild members had begun defecting. These were the Shinpai Mano, the warriors' men who whispered that the guild was out of touch. They questioned why certified cabbages needed red ink stamps. Why wax seals? Why the overhead? Let the cabbages speak for themselves. One muttered. He was swiftly assigned to inventory duty at the Daikin shed. Meanwhile, ordinary vendors were growing sly. One popular trick involved selling guild-certified cabbage by day and smuggling in illegal leaves after sundown to stretch the inventory. The official cabbages were placed on top of barrels. The contraband floated beneath, quietly fermenting. Another vendor filled her shop with decorative banners claiming guild quality. While selling entirely black market vegetables, when questioned, she simply replied, "Oh, I meant the guild of my heart." Even the inspectors, tasked with enforcing purity, began to grow suspiciously well-fed. Some had pickled fingers. A few were rumored to own farms outside the city. Corruption, like radishes in spring, was sprouting in every direction. And then came the shortage. That winter, a rare frost struck several of the outer provinces. Cabbage yields dropped. Storage barrels froze and cracked. Deliveries were delayed by icy roads and collapsed footbridges. Suddenly, there weren't enough vegetables, legal or illegal. Prices spiked. Tempers flared. One brothel madam reportedly offered pickled cabbage in place of sake. And in the tea houses of Nihonbashi, you could hear a phrase murmured in half-jokes: "The only thing scarcer than honesty is a decent head of cabbage." The Bakufu, alarmed, sent 2 officials to investigate. Their report was lengthy, boring, and handwritten in brush calligraphy. It included inventory charts, inkstands, and at least 5 paragraphs on barrel integrity. But the conclusion was clear. Now we must pause here to understand the broader economic ecosystem. Let it be known that any citizen found disturbing his neighbor by nocturnal rumblings shall be fined 5 solidi and sent to sleep beside the hippodrome hounds for 1 night. The decree was not enforced. By now, Eupraxius had begun documenting not just physical treatments, but mental tactics. He advised the emperor to focus on humble images: carpenters sanding wood, fishermen mending nets, a donkey pulling olives uphill. Thoughts with rhythm and repetition, like slow breathing in pictorial form. At times, Justinian requested more abstract prompts. "Describe to me," he once said, "the grain route from Antioch to Alexandria," in silence. The physician obliged, sketching in soft tones the ports, warehouses, ox carts, and toll stations that dotted the long coastal journey. The emperor closed his eyes, and for a moment, all was still. But then the wind shifted. A curtain fluttered. A servant dropped a tray. Justinian awoke with a jolt, convinced a Bulgar raid was imminent. Through all this, the manual grew. Its pages accumulated not just treatments, but reflections, philosophical musings on the nature of rest. "Sleep is the shadow of mercy," wrote Eupraxius. "A small death that teaches us the shape of peace. And yet the more we chase it, the more it slips behind the lampstand." Still, he tried. Not just for the emperor's sake, but for the city's. Because when Justinian did sleep, truly sleep, he was calmer, kinder, more measured. He once forgave a tax collector's error with a yawn. He invited children to race in the garden. It was as if, for a few precious hours, Byzantium had not only a ruler but a human being at the helm. And now, as the candle burns low and Eupraxius rubs the sleep from his own eyes, he writes one final line: "Perhaps rest is not a thing to be conquered, but courted. And some men must spend their lives only learning how to knock." Years later, the pages of the emperor's insomnia manual would be bundled together with spare bits of parchment and sealed in a damp monastery storeroom, next to jars of spoiled wine and a cracked reliquary no one trusted to open. The empire moved on. Emperors changed, the city changed. Sleep remained elusive, but for a brief window in the 7th century, Byzantium had attempted something truly strange. It had tried to systematize sleep not as a private comfort, but as a state duty. And in doing so, it left behind a record half medicine, half confession of what it meant to be both sleepless and powerful. In the final entries of the manual, Eupraxius no longer sounds like a court physician. He sounds like a poet, or a man very near exhaustion. "There are nights when even the moon grows tired," he writes. "Let the emperor be forgiven for staring back at her. The remedies have grown simpler now. No more bleeding or exotic herbs. No more astronomy charts or sacred thread arrangements. Just warm milk, a dim room, and the sound of distant bells from a chapel down the hill." Eupraxius advises that the emperor try not to fall asleep. Instead, he says, sit with wakefulness. Like you would a guest you do not like. Offer it tea. Be civil. Justinian, oddly, found this soothing. And in the last documented week of Eupraxius's service, something remarkable happened. The emperor slept. Not all night, not deeply, but a calm, natural sleep that lasted until birdsong. He did not dream of tax codes. He did not call out to long-dead generals. He did not accuse the pillows of treason. He simply slept. The next morning, Justinian rose, bathed, dressed in a linen tunic embroidered with the crest of the Theodosian dynasty, and issued exactly one decree: let there be no council before the hour of the second bell, and let no man be punished for dreaming at his desk. This was seen by the scribes as a small but revolutionary gesture. Eupraxius, having completed what he could, retired shortly thereafter to a quiet villa in Bithynia. He never wrote another manual, but his strange treatise on sleeplessness, part pharmacopoeia, part journal, endured in obscure corners of the empire, copied by curious monks, referenced by later physicians, and whispered about by insomniac emperors for generations. It was never viewed as a masterpiece, but neither was it. Discarded. One 10th century physician in Thessalonica scribbled in the margin, "His logic is weak, but his suggestions for Basil are very good." A faint praise, but perhaps fitting. Today, historians read the Insomnia Manual less for its practical advice and more for what it reveals about leadership, vulnerability, and the deeply human wish to be at peace in the dark. The emperor, for all his authority, could not order sleep to come. He could only prepare. He could only wait. And in this strange, stilted collection of oils and psalms and almond tarts, we glimpse not just the Byzantine court, but the quiet ache of anyone who has stared at a ceiling, waiting for morning. In the end, there are no grand declarations, just a final line, likely not by Eupraxius, but added later by a monk who found the manuscript centuries afterward, still slightly scented with herbs. It reads, "The emperor did not master sleep, but he learned at last the emperor's insomnia manual." Imagine, for a moment, that you are Emperor Justinian, the second ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire, son of Constantine IV, and supreme authority from the dusty edge of Anatolia to the marble palaces of Constantinople, and you haven't slept in 3 nights. You lie awake, the linen sheets tangling around your legs like vines. Outside, the Bosphorus murmurs quietly, but your mind is louder. Every unfinished letter, every hostile general, every subtle insult from the court circling like gulls. Insomnia is not just an inconvenience here in the palace. It's a threat. A tired emperor makes mistakes. A tired emperor forgets names. A tired emperor signs decrees that cost thousands of solidi in taxes because he misread a line. The empire cannot afford a groggy ruler. And so, in the still hours of the night, Justinian turns to his personal physician and demands a cure, not just for his own restless mind, but for future emperors too. Thus begins one of the strangest projects in Byzantine medical history, a royal manual for sleep. Insomnia Manual, as later scribes would nickname it, was never officially titled. It was a haphazard collection of notes, herbal recipes, philosophical reflections, and bedside rituals, all written in a shaky minuscule script by a court scribe, who often fell asleep at his own desk. The text was not widely circulated. It was too odd, too personal. But it survived, copied in a quiet monastery centuries later, and now catalogued under a Latinized name that roughly translates to Restorative Observations of the Night Wakeful Emperor. It was not just a document of medicine. It was a document of desperation. The manual opens with the simplest of observations. The body of the emperor is like the lantern of the city. If it burns unsteadily, the people fear the dark. Justinian's physician, a man named Eupraxius, suggested a number of immediate remedies, most of which sound more like instructions for dealing with a stubborn horse. Do not eat figs after sunset. Recline facing east, but never northeast. Chant aloud a list of your titles until you forget what they mean. Apply warmed oil to the arches of the feet, especially if dreaming of fire. Some of these methods had roots in Greco-Roman medicine. Galen, the physician-philosopher from centuries earlier, had recommended foot baths, light poetry, and avoiding roasted meats at dinner, but the Byzantines added their own flavors: Christian prayers, amulets embroidered with psalms, and soft-woven pillowcases filled with dried basil, rose petals, and sometimes less helpfully vinegar-soaked cotton. Justinian himself, according to palace lore, developed his own techniques. He would mentally review every ship that entered the Golden Horn that day, reciting the cargo and the merchant's by name. It was part meditation, part control. If he could account for every grain shipment, perhaps sleep would follow. He also commissioned a special mural for his bedchamber, a gently looping fresco of sheep in Byzantine robes, each marked with a different tax code. He named them, numbered them. Eventually grew suspicious that one was a disguised Bulgar agent. That mural was later removed after he began shouting tax laws in his sleep. Others in court were more sympathetic. Empress Theodora Justinian's long-suffering consort compiled a list of soothing diversions. These included folding papyrus into swans, listening to low choral hymns played on the kithara, and having a eunuch recite poetry about rivers. Only rivers. Nothing involving battle, prophecy, or women with hair like flames. Court servants were instructed to walk barefoot after dusk so as not to disturb the emperor's failed slumber. At one point, a junior priest was assigned to sit in the hallway outside Justinian's chamber and hum steadily in C minor until dawn. He lasted 3 nights before requesting transfer to a provincial leper colony. The imperial cook was also enlisted. It was believed that sleep began in the stomach, so Justinian's evening meals became an elaborate performance of edible sedation. He was offered stewed dates, milk infused with crushed poppy heads in carefully monitored quantities, soft barley porridge with honey and cinnamon, and his favorite, a small tart made with ground almonds and a single candied olive. When he once requested spiced lamb past midnight, the cook refused, citing matters of state digestion. And yet, for all the effort and incense and somic foot massages, sleep still refused to come. The manual becomes less coherent as it progresses. Its sentences fray, the ink wavers. Eupraxius begins repeating phrases. The moon does not sleep, but it shines quietly. Let no emperor chase lions in his dreams. If the brain is a harp, then its strings are wound too tight. At one point, he suggests placing a spoon under the emperor's pillow with a note, "Please sleep. I surrender." As you sit at the foot of Justinian's ivory-inlaid bed, you can almost hear the breathing of the palace, the creak of cooling tiles, the faint splash of distant waves, the sigh of the city beyond the walls. And still, the emperor turns. His eyes are open, watching the shadows, counting the sheep. The city may rest, but he does not. It is now well past midnight in the Baccalian palace, and somewhere between the tiled hallways and the perfumed bedchambers, Eupraxius the physician is writing again, his wax tablet half melted. From proximity to a nearby oil lamp, the emperor has not slept in 5 nights, and this, Eupraxius knows, is dangerous, not just for the emperor's health, but for the empires. In Byzantium, sleeplessness could be interpreted as divine punishment, or worse, as a sign of madness. And a mad emperor could find himself conveniently deposed, locked in a monastery, or quietly poisoned by a concerned nephew. Eupraxius understands the stakes. He begins to experiment. The physician's approach is meticulous, if occasionally absurd. In the margins of the so-called insomnia manual, he records a rotating schedule of sleep remedies tailored to the emperor's shifting moods. Monday, goat's milk warmed with hyssop and honey. Recite the names of archangels alphabetically. Tuesday, burn bay leaves beneath the bed. Avoid all discussion of military campaigns. Wednesday, offer the emperor a fig soaked in wine. Then read aloud from Proverbs only the dull bits. Thursday, fresh rosemary placed behind each ear. Encourage deep breathing and reflection on tax audits. Friday, play low hymns on the psaltery. Do not mention the bulgars. It was not science, it was theater. A ritual designed to trick the mind into rest. And yet, from time to time, Justinian did sleep, briefly, fitfully, but sleep. Nonetheless, Eupraxius began refining his theories. He became obsessed with the role of scent. The physician spent several weeks with the palace apothecaries, developing various herbal pillows, linen pouches stuffed with combinations of basil, coriander, lavender, thyme, and occasionally, at the emperor's request, dried lemon peel. The mixtures were recorded in agonizing detail. For dreams of calm rivers, basil, 2 sprigs, thyme, 1 pinch, coriander, half seed only. Avoid fennel unless grief is present. One particular recipe, involving crushed lettuce seeds and ash from burned parchment, was thought to encourage dreams free of war. The emperor described the resulting sleep as heavy but untrustworthy. Not all attempts were so botanical. Byzantine doctors, like their Roman predecessors, believed that imbalance in the body's four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, could affect temperament and health, including sleep. So Eupraxius tried restoring balance through phlebotomy, or bloodletting, a small incision in the forearm. A carefully measured ounce of blood removed. The emperor's reaction: disappointing, cold, I dreamt of goats. He also attempted gentle purgation, offering the emperor mild laxatives before bedtime to encourage what was delicately referred to as internal likeness. No documented sleep resulted, though Justinian did issue several grumpy edicts the next morning, restricting the sale of pickled cabbage within 3 miles of the palace. Desperate, Eupraxius turned to the stars. Byzantium, ever a city of contradictions, had its share of scholars who dabbled in astrology, though official doctrine discouraged it. Still, one monk-turned-mathematician named Brother Menodoros offered to chart the emperor's celestial sleep cycle. His findings were optimistic. When Mars rises after Saturn, the emperor shall find dreams easy. But if Venus ascends over the horned moon, the sleep shall be troubled, and the blankets too warm. The emperor noted the prediction, but dismissed Menodoros after an especially hot night with no wind and a blanket soaked in chamomile. Meanwhile, palace officials began to notice the side effects of Justinian's sleeplessness. He grew irritable, paranoid. He once accused a visiting ambassador of hiding spies in his beard. He changed the palace schedule, calling council meetings at odd hours, sometimes convening his advisors at dawn to discuss grain tariffs or sewage drains. These twilight sessions became the bane of the court. One morning, half asleep and deeply agitated, the emperor attempted to outlaw snoring. Lucanus became deferential, offering scented oils and asking about business. When a drunk sailor arrived, Lucanus became swift and silent, minimizing risk. When a fellow freedman appeared, they swapped jokes and complaints about the tax collector. And when a magistrate's slave stopped by, Lucanus watched his words, because even a barber's shop could be infiltrated. Especially when rumors traveled faster than chariots. Today, as Lucanus wraps a fresh cloth around the neck of a boy preparing for his toga virilis ceremony, a coming-of-age ritual, he offers more than grooming. He offers transformation. You are no longer just Flavius, the baker's son, he says, brushing off invisible lint. You are a man. And a man begins with a clean face, a straight back, and a little less nose hair. The boy tries not to laugh. He is nervous, excited. He grips the edge of the seat. Lucanus begins the ceremonial shave slowly. Each pass of the razor marks a shedding of childhood. Outside, 2 young girls giggle behind their tunics. Inside, the boy becomes someone new, someone who can enter the forum with dignity. By evening, the news of the Hadrian Wall rumor will have reached 3 taverns and at least one bathhouse. It will become part of the city's informal record. And when, months later, word truly arrives that a massive barrier is being built in the wilds of Britannia, people will say, of course, I heard it first in Lucanus's shop. Whether Lucanus knew it or guessed it, no one will remember. They'll only remember that he was first. You linger as the sun sets. Lucanus lights a small oil lamp, sweeps the last of the clippings, and checks his day's tally: 14 shaves, 3 haircuts, 2 nosebleeds, and 1 whisper that may turn out to be true. He looks up and says, funny thing about hair, it always grows back. But the things people say, those stick. By now, you've spent several days in Lucanus's humble barbershop, and it no longer surprises you that a place so ordinary could hold so much quiet influence. Each morning brings a new lineup of client senators in sandals, soldiers with Battle-worn shoulders, young lovers anxious to be made presentable before meeting a sweetheart's father. And Lucanus, with his careful hands and practiced silence, plays host to all of them. But today, a visitor arrives who turns even Lucanus's steady hands cautious. He wears a plain tunic, no richer than Lucanus's own, but walks like a man used to being obeyed. A guard stands discreetly near the doorway. He is an apparitor, a minor official in the city bureaucracy, tasked with relaying messages and carrying out administrative orders. And he is here not for gossip, but for grooming. Lucanus gives a respectful nod. Just a shave, sir? The man nods. He has a wax tablet tucked under his arm, a symbol of some quiet errand. As Lucanus begins his work, he notices something peculiar. The man's neck bears a thin scar, fresh, almost hidden beneath the hairline. A dueling wound? A punishment? Or something more political? Lucanus doesn't ask, but he files the observation away, as all good barbers do. Roman history is filled with those who wrote the laws, commanded the legions, and built the monuments, but few remember the ones who kept those people presentable. Barbers didn't just trim hair and scrape chins. They managed appearances, and in Rome, appearances were everything. A senator with a scruffy beard might be accused of negligence. A general with bushy eyebrows might be mocked in the streets. Even statues of the gods were carved with tidy curls and bare cheeks. It was Lucanus's job to preserve that illusion. Sometimes that meant more than just wielding a blade. He once helped a young lawyer prepare for his first courtroom appearance by rehearsing the way he held his chin. Another time, he taught a retired soldier how to speak more slowly to avoid frightening his new fiancée's family. He fixed broken combs, repaired cracked mirrors, carried messages between customers who didn't want to be seen together. And always, he listened. He knew the sound of a man lying, the glance of a woman trying not to cry, the long silence of someone who had lost something and didn't know how to speak of it. There was a day, years ago, when Lucanus himself was not a barber, but a slave. His master had taught him the craft only because no one else wanted to touch the old man's infected scalp, but Lucanus had watched. He had learned. And when manumission came, he used what he knew to carve out something rare, a quiet life. He didn't want to build monuments or rewrite laws. He wanted enough coin to buy oil, bread, and peace. And just maybe, to be remembered by the faces he shaved. One such face was Publius Septimius, a former grain inspector who, in his dotage, still visited Lucanus once a week. Every time he brought a new story from his youth, how he met his wife at a gladiator match, or how he once saw the Nile flood in person. Lucanus always listened, never rushed. And one day, the old man simply didn't arrive. Instead, a young woman came to the shop, her eyes red. "My father passed," she said. "But before he did, he asked me to give you this." It was a carved bone comb, worn smooth from years of use. On the handle, scratched with a pin, were the words, "To the barber who always made me feel like a senator." Lucanus kept it in a drawer, next to his razors. Time passed, as it always does. Beards came in and out of fashion. New barbers arrived. In the neighborhood, some cheaper, some louder, but Lucanus remained. Not because he was the best with a blade, but because he remembered your face. He remembered your story. And for most Romans, that was more valuable than perfume or polished sandals. Centuries later, as the empire began to crumble and the grand marble forums fell to disrepair, the profession of the Roman barber endured in quiet corners. Christian monks would adopt the practice, cutting each other's hair in silent cloisters. In medieval cities, barbers became surgeons, dentists, and bloodletters. The striped pole you now associate with barbers? It originated from the bloody bandages of those medieval successors, wrapped around a pole to dry. But before all of that, before clippers and cologne, there was Lucanus, sitting in his open-faced shop, greeting the day's first customer with A grunt and a nod, sharpening his razor and asking, "So, what news today?" By now, you may have forgotten the names of emperors and senators. But you'll remember the smell of Lucanus's oil, the sting of the razor, and the quiet grace of someone who shaped history, not with speeches or swords, but with soap and silence. The curious case of the Roman barbershop. You wake up in the city of Rome, not the sprawling imperial capital of later centuries, but the relatively tidy, optimistic metropolis of the early 2nd century CE. The emperor is Hadrian. Empire is at peace. And across the street from the bakery, just next to a shop selling imported oysters from Britannia, you see something curious. A barber shop. It's not quite what you'd expect. There's no spinning striped pole, no reclining leather chairs, no soft jazz playing over speakers. Instead, there's a narrow, open-fronted shop shaded by a sagging awning, with 3 stone stools, a marble basin, and a low wooden shelf covered in tiny knives, razors, pumice, stones, and tweezers. The scent in the air is a curious mixture of lamp oil, vinegar, garlic breath, and heated goat fat. Inside, a young man named Gaius sits nervously as his barber. Lucanus sharpens a thin bronze razor on a leather strop, humming a slow, off-key tune. This is where the magic happens. Or more accurately, where beards die and reputations are reborn. To understand the importance of a Roman barbershop, you must understand Roman facial hair. In the earliest days of Rome, beards were a symbol of maturity and dignity. Romulus and the first kings were all depicted with beards like wild laurels. But as the Republic matured, something shifted. Scipio Africanus, the famous general, began to shave his cheeks and chin. So did the young Julius Caesar, who was reputed to pluck out stray hairs by the root for a cleaner look. By the time of Hadrian, ironically, the first emperor in generations to bring the beard back into fashion, the Roman clean-shaven look had become a kind of informal social code. Clean chin? You're an urban gentleman with taste. Stubble? Perhaps you're rustic or worse, a philosopher. Full beard? You're making a statement possibly suspicious. Barbershops, or tonstronae, had sprung up in nearly every corner of the city. They were as much social spaces as grooming stations, tiny hubs of local gossip, backhanded compliments, and unsolicited opinions. If you lived in a modest Roman neighborhood, your day might begin with a trip to Lucanus the barber. Lucanus isn't a free citizen. He's a freedman formerly enslaved who learned his trade cutting the beard of his former master. Upon earning his freedom, he opened this shop and quickly developed a reputation for smooth cheeks and clever jokes. Today, Gaius is here not just for a shave, but for advice. He's about to present a legal petition to a magistrate, and his mother insisted he look civilized. So he's having his beard trimmed short, his eyebrows plucked, and somewhat grimly his nose hair removed with a twisted bronze wire. Lucanus mutters, "If it hurts, it's working." Gaius winces. Barber tools were rather more brutal then. Today's, the Roman razor, called a novacula, was small, straight-edged, and notoriously prone to nicking. Shaving cream didn't exist, but lye soap, olive oil, or even crushed fig pulp might be applied to soften the skin. Pumice stones were used to scrape away dead skin. Tweezers plucked hairs individually. Occasionally, hot wax might be used to remove entire patches of fuzz. There was no anesthesia, only stoicism. Barbers were expected to be quick, neat, and talkative. The best could shave a man in under 5 minutes. The worst might leave you with a bloodied chin and a lifelong grudge. Lucanus, fortunately, is one of the good ones. He offers Gaius a warm cloth and a drop of myrrh-scented oil afterward. It costs a little extra, but Gaius doesn't mind. He has a date tonight with the daughter of a fish merchant. You'll smell better than her father. Lucanus jokes. Barbershops weren't just for grooming. They were also informal news centers. Senators might send their slaves to eavesdrop on local gossip. Shopkeepers would pop in to hear about the latest edicts from the forum. Local poets might perform a verse while waiting for a haircut. Some barbers even kept client logs, rudimentary appointment books where regulars paid in advance for monthly shaves and eyebrow shaping. These logs doubled as debtor lists, and more than one barber had to send a slave boy to knock on a client's door and collect an overdue beard fee. Lucanus's list is neatly rolled and tied with string. His regulars include 2 merchants, 1 retired centurion, and a teenage boy who insists on having his chest hair plucked every week to impress his wrestling instructor. Still, not all barbers were beloved. A famous satirist, Marshall, once mocked a barber for talking too much while he shaved. He sliced my lip while praising my diction, nicked my chin reciting a verse, and nearly removed my nose for a joke that wasn't funny. And yet, the profession endured. Barbers were seen as necessary, if occasionally annoying. They were part artisan, part therapist, part newsman. Some even rose to fame in the imperial court, known for styling the emperors themselves. One was rumored to be the only man allowed to touch the Emperor Domitian's head. Another was said to have gained political influence simply by knowing which senator had a mole on his neck. Back in the shop, Lucanus finishes Gaius's trim and dusts his shoulders with perfumed chalk. He nods in approval. You'll make your petition, you'll win, and you'll be married by Saturnalia. Gaius blushes. He leaves a few extra coins on the counter. Lucanus tucks them into a clay jar behind the razor oil dot as Gaius steps into the dusty Roman sunlight. He looks clean-shaven, respectable, and slightly terrified. He has no idea if his legal petition will succeed. But thanks to Lucanus, at least he won't be laughed out of the forum. And that is the curious truth. In a city of marble temples, triumphal arches, and sprawling aqueducts, the humble barber shop endured not because it was glorious, but because it was useful. It kept Rome smooth-cheeked, well-informed, and just a little bit vain. Even the mighty Hadrian, who brought back the beard, likely got his trimmed by someone like Lucanus. You return to the barber shop the next day. Lucanus is already at work, slicing carefully around the jawline of an elderly customer with a face like dried parchment. A teenage apprentice sweeps up, curled bits of hair from the floor with a straw broom, careful not to disturb the customer's sandals. On the bench outside, 2 men argue quietly about the grain tax in Syria. If you thought the barber shop was merely about grooming, today will convince you otherwise. This is Rome's unfiltered radio gossip, satire, and street-level news delivered between swipes of a razor, while official decrees were posted on large whitewashed boards called album, and town criers roamed the forum shouting edicts. Most Romans still preferred a more intimate source of news, people, and were better to collect that people-driven intelligence than a barber shop. You didn't need a literacy test or a toga to sit on Lucanus's bench. Everyone from a freedman's son to a retired soldier with a bad knee came through here. The day's headlines: a new aqueduct delay due to missing marble, a runaway slave caught hiding in a laundry basket, a senator's wife seen buying herbs from a Greek healer with loose credentials. Loose credentials, Lucanus murmurs, trimming the nose hairs of his regular client Marcus. That's rich. As if any of us check a healer's license, Marcus grunts. He's in his 60s and once served with the legions in Dacia. His face carries a dozen faint scars, most of them from combat, a few from careless barbers over the years. Lucanus, I heard a whisper this morning, Marcus says as the blade slides across his cheek. They say Hadrian might be planning a new wall, not in the city somewhere far north. Lucanus raises an eyebrow. In Britannia? But it's all sheep and clouds up there. Exactly. Maybe that's the point. Fewer people to complain if it fails. They both laugh quietly. But the idea will spread. By mid-afternoon, 3 customers will have repeated the story. One will add that it's made of wood. Another will swear it's built of iron. Someone will say the emperor is mad. Someone else will say it's genius. None of them will know for sure. But now they've all participated in what the Romans called populi fama, the rumor of the people. An unofficial yet essential branch of Roman information. Roman society prized oratory and wit, but it was also a culture of observation. Public image mattered deeply. If you left your house in mismatched sandals, someone would comment on it before you reached the bakery. So the barbershop became a zone of preemptive reputation management. Did your breath smell? Lucanus had clove-soaked linen. Was your hair thinning? He could apply lead paste and claim it was divine scalp nectar. Were your ears too hairy? He had a small heated fork to singe them, and while he worked, he listened, politely, patiently, storing half-remembered remarks in his mental scroll. He knew which husbands were unfaithful, which merchants cooked their books, which magistrates feared their slaves. He didn't repeat everything. Only the parts that served a purpose, usually to make his clients feel more informed than they were. He offered the illusion of insight with the price of a shaved dot in more refined circles. Especially among the elite, this habit of gossip was considered vulgar. Cicero himself once scolded a senator for repeating barbershop rumors as if they were oracles. But in truth, the ruling class was just as dependent on the grapevine. They merely gathered their gossip in gardens or banquet halls instead of over shaving basins. One former consul even paid his barber to eavesdrop on the customers and report back daily. Lucanus had heard of that barber. A sharp razor and sharper tongue, he says. Even within the shop, social roles shifted depending on who sat in the chair. Not to know, but to remember that someone once ruled, however briefly, and tried. Centuries later, your scroll will be found half decayed by a modern archaeologist. The ink will have faded. The names will be smudged. But the impulse to create order out of historical dust will be understood. Modern scholars, armed with carbon dating and hieroglyph dictionaries, will attempt what you attempted, to build a coherent chronology from incoherent fragments. They, too, will fail, but they'll try. And they'll name their attempts things like Chronology Model C or Dynastic Hypothesis Revision Number 7. They will argue about whether Sobhotep IV is the same man as Sekhemre Katawi Sobhotep, or if that was actually Sobhotep I masquerading under a different title. They will debate whether the king lists were tampered with for political purposes or simply out of clerical fatigue. At a lecture in Berlin, someone will half joke, maybe Sobhotep was just Egypt's version of John Smith. People will laugh. Then someone will say, but someone had to build those fortresses. And silence will follow. You begin to realize something. The point isn't that history forgot these men. It's that they existed despite being forgettable. That they governed for a little while. That they handled grain shortages, kept scribes employed, and sent boats up the Nile to pay temple debts. That they were, for a moment, necessary. And that is enough. You fold your scroll. Tie it with a cord. Place it in the box labeled Annals Recent Pharaohs. Then you light a small oil lamp and write one last thing. I cannot tell you which Sobhotep did what, but they all tried. Let the record show they tried. You close the archive door. Outside, the Nile flows. Would you like to continue to section 3 of story 5? Hours behind the broken lintels of the temple roof, you realize the wind has picked up. A few scraps of papyrus flutter in the dust, long since faded. You pick one up. It's blank, but you wonder, did someone once write here, long live Sobhotep, who brought calm after chaos and whom no one now recalls? And if not those words exactly, then something like them? You are now in a museum. Not ancient this time, but modern. Quiet, white-walled, temperature-controlled. Glass display cases stretch along the marble floor, interrupted by softly buzzing dehumidifiers and small plaques in serif font. In one corner of the room, away from the glittering sarcophagi and golden funerary masks, sits a chipped basalt statue no taller than your knees. It depicts a man seated on a block throne. His hands rest stiffly on his knees. His face is square and confident, though the nose is missing. His name, carved in hieroglyphs at the base, Reads, Sikhumar Katawi Sebek. The card beside it says, possible 13th dynasty pharaoh, c. 1780 BCE. One of several rulers with this name, identity disputed. That's all. And yet this statue has outlasted nearly every royal project of his time. No pyramid, no vast mortuary complex. Just this basalt man, rescued from a ruined site in El-Lisht, shipped across oceans, and placed here among strangers. He's anonymous again. And somehow still remembered. The story of the 17 Sobkoteps is not one of grandeur. It's a story of survival by mistake. Their names were not meant to endure. They reigned in the margins of empire, holding the line between collapse and whatever came next. No Tutankhamun treasures. No Ramses battle scenes. Just fragments of cartouches, half-legible scarabs, and stone statues whose feet are missing. And yet, their existence still ripples through history. A handful of towns in Upper Egypt still carry fragments of their royal names, in temples once buried by sand. Archaeologists still puzzle over dedications bearing two overlapping kings, one likely replacing the other mid-construction. Scholars write papers with titles like Reconsidering the Succession of Sobkotep VIII and Scarabs and Sealings of the Lesser Pharaohs. Tourists sometimes see the name on a small plaque and ask, why are there so many of them? The guide usually shrugs and says, it was a popular name. But the truth is stranger. It was a name that became a placeholder, a title, a hopeful gesture during a time when Egypt was uncertain of itself. Imagine Egypt at that time. Not the Egypt of movies, but of real sand, real mud brick walls, and thousands of administrators trying to hold a fractured bureaucracy together. In Lower Egypt, the Hyksos foreign rulers were beginning to rise. Trade routes were shifting. Fortresses were crumbling. Temples were underfunded. And in Thebes, someone still had to wear the crown. Someone still had to approve tax collections, authorize canal repairs, and be depicted in ritual calendars as living Horus. Enter Sobekhotp. Who? Whichever one. He reigned for 2 years. He made do. Then another, and another. Names repeating like echoes in stone halls. A nation unsure if it was collapsing or simply waiting to be reborn. Later kings like the powerful Ahmose I or Thutmose III would not speak of these predecessors. The official king lists often skipped them. They were considered interim rulers, placeholders before the great dynasties returned. But history has a quiet way of favoring the overlooked. Today, we know more about these forgotten Sobkoteps than many of the later kings who succeeded them. We know what goods were shipped under their reigns: olive oil, honey, barley, and beer. We know their names were stamped on bricks found hundreds of miles apart, suggesting trade, or at least a functioning postal system. We know they issued decrees, some preserved on rotting scrolls, offering tax remissions, military commands, or donations to temples of Sobek. And we know their names were remembered just enough that later kings had to scratch them out and replace them, which is how you know they mattered. You walk past the basalt statue, past a case of scarabs bearing the crocodile god's image, past a fragment of a relief where a pharaoh stands before the goddess Mat, offering incense his name flaked away, then restored. You stop at a wall map of ancient Egypt. The 13th dynasty is marked by a faint, nearly invisible line. No great boundaries, no bold colors, but a note below reads, a period of brief reigns and forgotten kings, who nonetheless preserved the traditions of rule in an age of transition. You nod. Because now you understand. The 17 Sobkoteps didn't change Egypt. They kept it from breaking. They didn't build empires. They maintained continuity. They weren't remembered because they were mighty. They were remembered because they were many. Because even when the nation teetered on the edge of collapse, someone still stood up, put on the crown and said, I am Sobkotep. The flood will come. The taxes will be tallied. The gods will be praised. Let us continue. You step outside the museum. The sun is hot as it was in ancient Thebes. Somewhere, a river flows. A man named Sobkotep may be entirely forgotten. Or not. After all, you just remembered him, and 17 lives, once lost in dust, become real again, if only for the span of a quiet evening. The 17 lives of a forgotten pharaoh are standing in the desert heat, staring at a wall that was never meant to be seen again. The wall is old. Even the sand around it seems older. It bears a single carved cartouche, oval frame enclosing the hieroglyphs of a royal name. But something is strange about it. The name has been chiseled away, then recarved, then scratched out again, and below it, a smaller, sloppier version of the same name, as if someone tried to fix it and gave up. This was not the work of enemies. This was the work of bureaucrats. You are in Middle Egypt, halfway between the Theban temples and the northern delta, looking at a rural temple wall from the 13th dynasty of Egypt. A time when pharaohs came and went so quickly that priests stopped repainting their statues. The cartouche belongs to Sobkotep, but which one? There were at least 17 kings named Sobkotep between 1800 and 1650 BCE. And no one is quite sure which one did what. In most histories, the name Sobkotep is a footnote. Whichever he does not appear in the great monuments of Luxor or in Hollywood films. He has no pyramid bearing his name. His face is not taught in schools. Even his mummy, if ever found, would be filed under miscellaneous 13th dynasty. But once, one or more men with this name were pharaohs of Egypt. And that means that once, a man named Sobkotep ruled the two lands, received tribute from Nubian emissaries, wore leopard skins on feast days, and sent his scribes to record the flood levels of the Nile. That's not nothing. It's just hard to remember. You imagine you are one of his scribes. It is the 4th month of the season of inundation. The Nile has risen high, but not too high, an auspicious sign. Your reed pen is sharpened, your ink dish carefully balanced on a wooden board. You've been assigned to the royal decrees office, where you write in triplicate on long rolls of papyrus, copies for the central archive, the regional governors, and the temple priests. The decree today is a tax reduction for fishermen in Fayoum. Apparently, the marshes there have yielded fewer eels this season, and the temple of Sobek, the crocodile god, has agreed to intercede on their behalf. The scribe next to you sighs. Another Sobek decree, he mutters. You ask, which Sobek? He shrugs. The god, the king, does it matter? Just write it in red ink and underline it. You do. Egypt's 13th dynasty was not known for stability. Unlike the glory years of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, this period, sometimes called the Second Intermediate Period, was marked by short reigns, administrative confusion, and palace intrigue that mostly stayed off the monuments. Many pharaohs reigned for less than 5 years. Some less than 1. The names blur together in temple lists and scarab seals. Sobkotep I is possibly the same person as Sobkotep II, unless Sobkotep II is actually Sobkotep IV, who might have built the fortress near Madamid, or maybe that was just a reused inscription. At some point, a future historian scribbled a note in the margin of a scroll. This king may not have existed, or he may have ruled twice. And so the confusion grew, yet the evidence is there, if you know where to look. In the debris of forgotten tombs and reused statues, in broken clay tablets from warehouses that no longer exist, in the patterns of administrative stamps found on wine jars from the western delta. One seal reads, "The good god Sobkotep, beloved of Mot." Another, found hundreds of miles away, reads, "Sobkotep, may his reign be long." But it wasn't. Each Sobkotep seems to have reigned just long enough to be remembered by a few officials, stamped on a few trade records, mentioned in a decree about barley, or perhaps immortalized in a temple that no longer bears his name. The greatest mystery is why the name kept being used. Sobek was a powerful deity, to be sure, associated with strength, fertility, the Nile's life-giving floods, and the crocodile's terrible calm. A king naming himself Sobkotep, meaning Sobek is pleased, was making a statement. But 17 times? That suggests something else. Perhaps the name was a political placeholder, a way for ambitious men to claim divine legitimacy without provoking conflict. Perhaps it was a way to signal continuity in a time of disorder. Or maybe it was something more personal. Maybe the first Sobkotep was kind. Maybe he brought good rains. Maybe he died young. And his name became something whispered in court. If only we had another Sobkotep. And so they kept trying. The temple you're standing in now, the one with the confused cartouches, was abandoned long before Rome rose. It lies off the main tourist paths. No sphinx. No souvenir stalls. Just a dusty plain and a few scattered columns whose capitals resemble open lotus blooms. And this one wall where history scratched itself out and tried again, a name written. Forgotten, remembered, then forgotten again. You reach out and trace the grooves with your fingers, not because it matters to modern power, but because it mattered once, and because someone tried, more than once, to make it matter again. As the son of certainly. Here's section 2 of story 5, the 17 lives of a forgotten pharaoh. Let us imagine, if you will, that you are an archivist at the Temple of Heliopolis. The year is something like 1652 BCE, though you wouldn't call it that. For you, it is year 2 of the reign of the good god Sobkotep, son of Ra. Which one? You don't ask anymore. Your job is to keep the royal annals, a humble but deeply tedious post, mostly involving receipts, damaged tablets, and trying to untangle which grain tithe belongs to which Sobkotep's third regnal year. Today, the high priest brings you a request. A formal one. We must update the king list, he says with a tone of weary resolve. The southern governors are asking for clarification. Of what? You ask, which Sobkotep we're currently serving. You nod slowly, open a fresh scroll, and begin to write. Egyptian king lists were not history in the way modern readers imagine it. They were more like sacred chronologies, political prayers carved into stone, inscribed onto papyrus, etched in temple walls in neatly ordered lines. But they were also full of omissions, duplications, and edits made centuries after the fact. By the 13th dynasty, keeping the list accurate had become nearly impossible. You, the temple archivist, have a problem. You can't tell which Sobkotep came after which. Some left behind monuments, some did not. Some ruled from Thebes, others from Memphis. Some reigned for 6 years, others for 6 months, or 6 days. You consult the worn tablets of the Turin Canon, a vast administrative list kept in the royal archive. On one column you see an entry for Sekemer Kutawi Sobkotep, on another, a Konker Sobkotep, then a Sobkotep Merir, and then a frustratingly vague Sobkotep Year 1. Some names match the scarabs found in trade centers. Others match ceilings on jars of date wine. Still others appear only in one place: a statue base, a half-erased tomb inscription, or a line of papyrus thought to be a shopping list. You sigh and scribble notes to yourself. Sobkotep X? Possible duplicate. Unclear reign, possibly co-regent. Did he build anything? Seal found near Buhan check warehouse inventory. This is a mess. Meanwhile, outside the temple, Egypt continues on. The river rises and falls. Canals are dredged and repaired. Children are born into farming families who know the name Sobkotep, but couldn't care less which one it is. A local carpenter, when asked to carve a new lintel for a grain storehouse, asks which king to dedicate it to. The clerk replies, whichever Sobkotep you like. The carpenter shrugs and carves, in the name of the good king Sobkotep, who keeps the granaries full. It is, in its way, a kind of truth. Back in your archive, The king list has grown longer and messier. Some names are listed with grand titles. He who subdues the desert tribes, beloved of Pata, the hawk who guards the two lands. Others are marked simply, Sobkotep, reign uncertain. One, strangely, is circled in red. No note explains why. You add a comment in the margin, possibly revered by later dynasties? Or a clerical error? You are haunted by the thought that one of these kings might have been brilliant. What if Sobkotep VI brought peace to Nubia? What if Sobkotep XII prevented famine? What if Sobkotep XIV, for a brief moment, made the Nile run sweet and the court harmonious? But without monuments or surviving papyri, their greatness, if it existed, is invisible. Begin to wonder if even ghosts are bureaucrats. The camel handlers are the real custodians of the postal world. They speak to their beasts in a private language of throat clicks and whistled tones. Each camel has its own quirks. One hates red cloth. Another insists on kneeling twice before standing. The handlers know not just the animal's moods, but the weather by their behavior. When camels become restless at dawn, a storm is likely by afternoon. When they sleep with heads raised, a long journey is coming. You write these down in the margins of your station log, not because you're required to, but because it feels like knowledge worth preserving. Then there are the scribes, while camels carry messages. It is the scribes who truly shape the tone of the empire. A well-trained scribe can adjust the entire meaning of a letter, without changing a single word, simply by choosing which ink to use, or how deeply to press the seal. Red ink implies urgency. Blue, a desire for compromise. Gold, used rarely, suggests either flattery or threat. One older scribe named Marwan teaches you to detect forged seals by smell. Real wax, he says, always smells faintly of olives. Anything else too sweet, too sharp, too clean is suspect. You learn quickly you are not good with camels. But with ink and wax, you begin to find your footing. Over the course of several weeks, a pattern emerges. Messages come in. Messages go out. A governor in Basra is reminded to pay his salt tax. A silk merchant in Damascus writes to inquire about mold. A father sends his daughter instructions for an herbal remedy involving pomegranate rinds and vinegar. None of this seems urgent. And yet, each time a message is delivered, the station rejoices not with fanfare, but with a small shared silence. 1. Camel returns with a scroll whose contents you are not authorized to read. But you notice something odd. Inside, wrapped in silk, is a pressed flower. Just a wild bloom from a riverbank. You ask the scribe Marwan if this is a known symbol. He considers. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Sometimes, even in an empire of procedures, people send things simply because they are beautiful. Your time at the station ends quietly. No grand farewell. No ceremonial send-off. You board a slow barge back to Baghdad, watching the flat fields slide by, dotted with goats, and the occasional watchtower. As you travel, you keep the station's logbook in your lap, running your fingers over the faint grooves of your own entries, tiny notes in a system that has existed for generations. You think of the relay stations you've never seen, stretched across the deserts and river valleys, of the camels swaying rhythmically under starlight, of the letters still in transit, of the seals, broken or not. You wonder how many letters have arrived too late to be read, and how many, even when opened, were never truly understood. But most of all, you wonder, when you are gone and the next clerk sits where you once sat, will your name be read aloud during the evening shift? Will it drift out into the dusk, not as a summons, but as a kind of remembrance? You return to Baghdad changed in subtle ways. You walk a little slower now, the way a courier does after weeks on the trail. You find comfort in neatly stacked scrolls, in the hiss of wax poured cleanly into a seal mold. You begin to prefer camels to people, but mostly, You return with a quiet certainty that the Abbasid postal system is less about messages and more about maintaining a kind of order, a lattice of expectation that stretches from desert to mountain to sea, even when the letters don't arrive, even when they don't say much of anything, even when they never get read at all. Your old desk is still there at the central post house, though the stool is slightly more wobbly. Someone has borrowed your ink knife and not returned it, but your blotting cloth remains folded exactly as you left it. Marwan, the senior scribe, grunts a greeting and slides a stack of wax tablets toward you. Reply to these before sunset. The caliph's courier is riding out tomorrow. Back to work, weeks pass. You read-acclimate. One day, you're assigned to oversee the monthly audit of the Lost Messages Ledger, a humble leather-bound book that tracks undelivered letters, misrouted couriers, and other forgotten details. Most entries are brief. Kufa to Raqqa, broken saddle. Jundishapur to Nishapur, rider injured by goat. Samara to Basra, scroll fell into Tigris. Contents illegible. The majority of these stories are mundane, but you notice that none are deleted or discarded. Each failure is preserved part of the system, like a scar that reminds the body where it has healed. One entry is older than the others. A letter sent from Mecca to Baghdad, over 30 years ago, marked undelivered, no recipient found. You track down the scroll in the archives. It's brittle with age, the seal crumbled. You open it anyway. It reads, "To the one I once knew, the sands have erased your name from the stones, but I still write it on the inside of my thoughts. I have forgotten your voice, but not the way you used to wait for my letters. This is the last one. There's nothing left to say, except, I hope you are well. If not, may you be at peace anyway." There's no signature. You stare at it for a long time. Later, you return the scroll to its envelope, reseal it gently, and write in the ledger, "Recovered." Contents remain private. That night, Marwan invites you to the roof to drink weak tea and watch the city lights shimmer against the river. "Do you know what makes the postal system work?" he asks. You raise an eyebrow. "Not ink, not camels, not even the caliph's orders," he says, squinting toward the dark skyline. "It's the assumption that someone, somewhere is listening. That's it." You sip your tea and say nothing. But something in your chest shifts. A few days later, you are entrusted with a letter of unusual delicacy. It is not marked urgent, nor is it decorated with gold or silk. Its seal bears no government insignia, only the faint outline of a fig leaf. Return address is vague. A caravanserai near Ray. The recipient? Unknown. Just a name. The scribe who once waited by the eastern gate. It could be anyone. Or no one. But you recognize the handwriting. It's the same script that once asked you, "Are you still in Baghdad?" You hesitate. Technically, this letter is undeliverable. The registry has no such person listed, no official destination. You are supposed to mark it for destruction. Instead, you carry it with you for days, unsure. Eventually, you walk to the same gate where you once waited for a camel, where the air still smells faintly of hot dust and barley. You sit by the post pillar and open the letter. Inside is a single line. "I never stopped reading, even when your letters stopped arriving. That's all." You read it 3 times. Fold it. Place it back in the pouch. And then you do something you're not entirely sure is allowed. You write a reply. "Neither did I." You seal it in simple wax. No title, no flourish. You leave it in the station's unclaimed messages drawer, where it will either be found or forgotten. It doesn't matter. Years pass. The Abbasid Empire faces rebellions, river floods, caliphs who rule briefly and vanish into gardens or prisons. The bird system evolves. Some roots fall quiet, others revive. New ink colors emerge. Pigeons are tested again, with mixed results. But the letters still move. The camels still walk. Steady and slow. Scribes still argue over pen angles, and somewhere, across the dust and the time and the thousands of seemingly pointless messages, you begin to see what the postal system truly was. Not a courier of decrees, not a weapon of power, but a map of human longing. One letter at a time, it traced our desire to reach someone else. To be heard. To be answered. To matter. Even when the message says nothing. Story 4. Even when it never arrives. The postal camels of Abbasid Baghdad. You are standing in the heat just outside the gates of Baghdad. Around the year 843 CE, it is late afternoon. The kind of heat that doesn't shout, but simmers. A soft shimmer of mirage wavers over the bricks of the Eastern Road, and the city behind you is humming. Vendors haggling over dates, scribes muttering through contracts, apprentices scrubbing ink from their sleeves. But you are not thinking about any of that. You are waiting for the camels, not just any camels, bird camels. Government camels. The backbone of the Abbasid postal system, and the most reliable thing in your otherwise unsteady life. Somewhere between Kufa and here, a courier is carrying a message meant for you. You've been waiting 12 days. You have no idea when it will arrive or if it ever will. But you know it travels on padded hooves, wrapped in soft leather and bureaucracy. And for now, that's enough. In the Abbasid Caliphate, the postal system Albert is less like a mailbox and more like a nervous system. Letters do not just carry information. They carry proof that the empire is alive, aware, and listening to itself. Originally modeled after earlier Persian and Roman courier networks, the Abbasid system is a marvel of slow precision. At its height, it spans from the western fringes of Tunisia to the foggy borders of Central Asia. Between these points lie relay stations called Kanaft, placed carefully along major routes every few dozen kilometers. Each station houses camels, scribes, and tired riders who wait, often for days, for the next handoff. It is an empire of waiting. In Baghdad, the DW Ain al-Bard, the central postal office, is tucked near the Palace of the Golden Gate. The building is not particularly grand, but it smells wonderfully of parchment and rosewater. Inside, junior scribes ink travel permits while senior officials track packages, mark travel times, and complain about camel ailments. Everyone agrees. The camels are the real heroes. These are not your everyday wandering beasts. These are elite, selectively bred postal camels, trained not for war or caravan duty, but for consistency. They trot in a careful, swaying rhythm that somehow shakes neither ink nor expectation. Their hooves are wrapped in woven mats to reduce fatigue. Their names are recorded in books. One is even known for recognizing specific couriers by smell. His name, depending on who you ask, is either Cinnamon or Fire-Tooth. At each relay station, a system of copper bells is used to alert incoming couriers. The bells vary in pitch, depending on which route the courier is arriving from, you're told. The central station in Baghdad keeps a chart just for bell tones. You wonder whether someone somewhere has memorized them all. When you first took a minor job as a postal clerk's assistant, you imagined it would be full of letters from caliphs to governors, secret edicts, and wax seals broken only in torchlight. And yes, those do exist, but most days, you read things like, "To my cousin Idris in Basra, the chickpeas last month were undercooked. Please instruct your cook." Or, "To the court of Mosul, the mint shipment is delayed due to sheep." These are not world-changing communications. They are reminders that the world continues, a less dramatic but far more reliable kind of comfort. One letter arrives with a broken seal and smells faintly of cinnamon. It reads, in a barely legible scrawl, "The moon looked particularly slow. Tonight, are you still in Baghdad?" You send back only, "Yes." The rest doesn't need saying. Despite your lowly role, you grow increasingly invested in the system itself. You begin collecting odd facts, mostly out of boredom, but also out of admiration. Did you know, for example, that a trained camel can cover 60 miles a day and still not lose its footing? Or that the postmaster of Ray once spent his entire annual budget on fig cakes, claiming it helped keep riders awake on night shifts. There's even a rumor that in especially urgent cases, pigeons are released alongside camel couriers, just in case the camel is delayed by weather or overfed on alfalfa. Juad, an older courier who has seen much of the empire from camelback, once told you, most of what we carry is not urgent. But it still matters. Because the silence that would follow otherwise, it's heavier than the letter. You never forgot that. One evening, just as the sun begins to slip into the Tigris, the bells ring. Not the high tone from Samara. Not the deep one from Basra. But the mid-level chime from the western gate, possibly Kufa. You scramble to the dispatch court, ink-stained sleeves flapping, and watch as a long-legged dust-covered camel lumbers in, snorting softly. The rider dismounts. Dust is shaken off parchment. The satchel is opened. Inside at last a letter. It is written in familiar hand. You do not open it right away. Instead, you hold it. Let the parchment warm in your hand. Feel the dried wax crumble slightly beneath your thumb. And in that moment, you remember, the letter has already done its job. It reached you. It arrived. The words will come later. For now, you sit quietly beside the post yard and watch the camel drink from the stone trough. Its ears twitch gently. The city bell rings in the distance. Somewhere, a scribe sighs over the wrong kind of ink. The empire, improbably, continues. The next time you travel outside Baghdad, it is not for pleasure. You've been assigned a short-term posting at one of the Kanafta relay station halfway between Baghdad and Waisit. It is an unremarkable building, squat and rectangular, situated beside a date grove that hums with flies in the mid-morning and with crickets at night. There is no market here, only a single tea seller and a smith who sharpens camel shoes in long, slow strokes. But there is a station master, 2 scribes, and an entire shed full of official clay seals, more than any one station could possibly use. Still, you are expected to inventory them weekly. It is not a glamorous assignment. The most exciting thing that happens in your first 3 days is a delivery of dry figs that turns out to contain precisely 1 beetle. The postmaster makes a note of it in the station log. Yet in that quiet, something else begins to emerge. You begin to notice the small rhythms that keep the Abbasid world moving. Rhythms that happen behind the grand palaces, beneath the layers of scrolls, and between the padded feet of long-distance camels. The relay station operates on 4 shifts, divided by light rather than by clock. Morning starts at the first call to prayer. Afternoon is when the well casts no shadow. Evening arrives when the muezzin can no longer see the color of a thread. Night is everything else. During each shift, the junior clerk reads aloud the names of expected couriers, an act more ceremonial than useful. From Al-Madan by way of Samara. From Basra by the southern ferry. From Mosul by the Salt. R.O.A.D. The clerk recites, regardless of whether the couriers are due that day. It is believed that to speak the names helps ensure their safe arrival. Superstition perhaps, but one backed by centuries of camel hoofprints. One night, as you help clean a wax tablet used to track deliveries, the station master tells you a story. 2 years ago, a courier from Tarsus was delayed by snowfall. Station at Tikrit received word and lit a green lamp in the courtyard. For 7 nights it burned. When he finally arrived, half-starved, clothes frozen, he wept to see it still lit. You glance at the small oil lamp on your own desk. Its wick is almost out. Quietly you trim it and relight the flame. You soon discover that every station has its quirks. Some mark courier arrivals with small drum taps. Others hang talismans from date palms, braided strings of camel hair, pressed with miniature ink-stamped seals. The station at Khazar al-Karina is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a former scribe who died while inking a decree. His unfinished letter is said to show up in courier bags every 7th new moon. The letter says nothing unusual. It merely reads, "In reply to your most honorable request, the matter is under review." You begin marking not just jars and sacks, but names. Not for tribute records, those remain lean and vague, but for yourself. You begin writing small side notes. Baya, healer lives above Pandra. Chaco, basket weaver lost 3 trees to fire. Modi drinks too much but knows every stream path by smell. You don't know what you're building. It isn't an archive. It's barely a memory, but it's something. One morning you hear news of a rebellion near the southern edge of the region. A headman refused to hand over his tribute. The Maratha troops burned his grain stores. No one died, they say. Just one village erased. You visit 2 weeks later. The clearing is blackened. Not ruined, but wounded. The trees remain, but the shrines are gone. A woman you once knew, Sila, who used to make honeyed bread from mahua and millet, sits on a rock, chewing on a root. She tells you they will rebuild. They always do. She's more worried about the bees. The smoke has driven them off. You write that down too. And now, as you sit under a broad mahua tree that has not flowered in 2 seasons, you wonder, if you stop counting, will the forest become invisible to those who do not live in it? Another year has passed. You have stopped marking the seasons by the rains or the harvests. Instead, you track them by the number of new faces asking for old things. The Maratha scribes have multiplied. Their ledgers have grown thicker. And now, British surveyors have arrived, too, clad in khaki and white, red-faced and always scribbling with heavy brass theodolites and polished compasses, measuring the land as if it were a room with corners. They do not ask about the forest spirits, or why the mahua flowers are collected before dawn. They do not notice the small stones placed at trail forks or the reed whistles used to call goats home. They speak of revenue blocks and extraction zones. They seem startled to learn that some trees are not chopped down even when dead, because they are still remembered. You watch it all with the quiet patience of someone who has seen rain come late and still trusted it would come at all. One day, a scribe named Joshi comes to your hut. He's from Pona, a scholar by training, with soft hands and a soft voice. He carries a satchel filled with ink and new printed forms. He tells you that, starting this year, tribute must be recorded on paper. The bamboo tallies are insufficiently standardized. You nod. It is not a surprise. Joshi is kind but hurried. He asks many questions you cannot easily answer. How many mature mahua trees in this sub-district? What is the average yield per household? Can you categorize output by commercial versus domestic use? You do your best. But the answers are not in your head. They are in the air, in the soil, in the hands of Baya, in the whispers of old women who remember when that one sacred tree flowered twice in a season of famine. Joshi means well. He is trying to build a model, but you know this forest cannot be modeled. You continue your rounds. In Lahari village, you meet a group of young women weaving mats from sal leaves. They are humming an old harvest song, but they stop when you approach. One of them, a bold girl named Sheila, asks you a question no one has asked before. Do the headmen get paid for giving away the mahua? You chuckle, then realize she is not joking. No, you say it's tribute. Then why do they agree to it? You pause. Because they always have. She frowns. But we gather the flowers, not them. You say nothing. Because she is right. Later that night, you sit with Rajlu again, the old headman from Pathradi, the man who always had fermented drink ready for you. He is older now, thinner. His son has taken over most duties. I sometimes wonder, he says, sipping from a clay cup, if mahua was always this important. Or if it became important because someone decided it could be taxed. You watch the fire crackle. It was always sacred. He nods. But now it is also a commodity. A silence settles between you. Then he adds, perhaps next year we stop paying tribute. You raise an eyebrow. And then? We pay ourselves. That spring, something strange happens. The mahua trees flower late, again. But when they do, they bloom with such abundance that villagers call it a forgiving year. The petals fall thick on the ground, sweet and pale gold. Even the elders say they've never seen such a bloom. The air smells like honeyed smoke. No tribute is collected. That year, the Maratha warbands are too busy fighting among themselves, and the British officers are distracted by rail surveys further south. You write in your ledger, "Year of flowers, no tax." No one questions it. Time passes. You grow older. Your legs ache after long walks. The hills feel taller. Your satchel heavier. You no longer visit every village, but people come to you now. They bring you stories, tallies, questions. A boy named Danu, quick-footed and curious, asks if he can learn the marks and knots. You show him. He asks why the older tallies are made of darker bamboo. You explain they were aged in fire to make them last. He nods, then asks, "What happens if they burn?" You smile. Then we remember. Years later, word comes that printed forms are now required for all tribute across the province. Paper replaces bamboo. Silver replaces jars. Traders build storehouses. Oil presses hum all night. Mahua is now sold by the barrel, not the flower. You are no longer needed. Still, you sit beneath the great mahua tree at the edge of Pathradi and trace your fingers along the grain of your last ledger. Do not feel bitter, only quiet, because you know that some truths are too large to be captured in forms. That the forest will keep speaking, even if no one listens. That the scent of mahua at dawn cannot be taxed. And perhaps years from now, when the revenue forms have faded and the roads are overgrown, someone will find your ledger and wonder what the grooves meant. And maybe, just maybe, they will smell the great mahua exchange. A quiet century in the forests of central India. You are not a king, nor a warrior, nor a saint, but a tribal tax collector in the highland forests of Gondwana. It is the year 1798, give or take. Calendars are slippery here. You use seasons to measure time. The bloom of the mahua trees, the migration of wild boar, the slow withdrawal of monsoon mist from the stones. Your name is Koka. You are a man of ledgers, though yours are made of bamboo slips, not papyrus or parchment. And you are a servant technically to the Maratha state. More practically, to the small forest village that feeds you fermented mahua and sends children to your doorstep when someone has misplaced a goat. Your job is simple and maddening. Walk the forest paths from village to village, counting sacks of forest produce lac, resin, honey, sal leaves, and ensuring the headmen make their agreed payments in kind. You carry a stylus, a string of carved tokens, and a pouch of spices. Your ledger has no ink, only notches and knots. But it is precise. This year, the harvest is uneven. The mahua trees, tall, pale-barked trees, sacred to nearly every soul in Kotu, this region, have dropped fewer flowers. Some say it's because the winds came late. Others whisper that the spirits are restless. But you suspect it's simpler than that. Too many young men are leaving the forest to work on roads. In lowland towns where rice grows more obediently than forest roots. As you walk, you note the changes. Old footpaths are vanishing under creepers. Small shrines lie in disrepair. You see more strangers these days, Maratha agents, scribes with delicate hands, and even a British officer last week, red-faced and sweating into his uniform, trying to ask where the mahua revenue list was kept. You did not answer. You arrive in Pathradi, a clearing dotted with earthen homes and granaries shaped like upside-down baskets. The village headman, Rajlu, greets you with a bowl of warm, fermented mahua. His daughter, barely 9, brings a dish of roasted tubers. You eat slowly, listening to the rhythmic calls of a nearby drum, someone's grinding millet, or perhaps announcing a new marriage. Rajlu sighs as he sits beside you. Only 4 jars this year. he says. You nod. Last year was 6, he shrugs. The flowers came, but not all at once. Many spoiled before we could dry them. You reach into your satchel and pull out a string of carved tokens. 4 notches for 4 jars. Simple math. But the implications aren't simple. The tribute has dropped. And soon, someone will notice. Not today, though. You write nothing. You drink your mahua. In the weeks that follow, you travel across 7 more hamlets, each nestled in the folds of thick sal and teak forest. Each village has a slightly different story. Some lost half their crop to mold. Others say elephants trampled the drying mats. One community, high in the hilltops, claims the trees simply forgot how to bloom, and yet, something else is happening too. The villagers have begun trading mahua beyond the forest, not just as drink or dried flower, but as oil and medicine. Traders from the plains have discovered its use for soap and lamp oil. They pay in silver coins and bright bolts of cloth. You note the appearance of brass cooking pots where there were once only earthen ones. And children now chew sugarcane. Not just tamarind. The headmen are pleased. The women are cautious. You are curious. Then one afternoon, a new face appears at a village meeting. A man named Ramdas, soft-spoken and thin, wearing a Maratha turban and carrying a notebook the size of a flattened mango. He says he has come to standardize collection. You recognize the term. It means one thing: paperwork. He smiles as he speaks, but he never looks at the women. He wants to know how many baskets of flowers are gathered per tree, how many trees per family, how many families per hamlet. You have this knowledge, but you hesitate to share it. Not because it's secret, but because it's alive, changing. Never quite true from one season to the next. You ask instead, what will happen if the numbers don't match? Ramdas smiles. Then the excess will be counted as unreported income. You do not respond. That night, you sit by a small cooking fire in a forest shrine, turning a split bamboo ledger over and over in your hands. You run your fingers along the grooves that mark this year's low yield. You remember a time when these ledgers were sacred, tied to the village drum, sung aloud during festivals, and corrected only by firelight and consensus. Now, men with soft hands want to file them in wooden boxes. Still, you write. Carefully. You prepare a clean bundle of tallies and notes, some real, some estimated, some quietly edited for the sake of mercy. You do not know who will read them. Perhaps no one. But you write them anyway, and as you listen to the chirp of crickets and the distant rhythm of a tribal wedding drum, you wonder, when the trees no longer bloom, will anyone remember who counted the flowers? You wake before sunrise, tucked beneath a blanket woven from coarse cotton and tree bark thread. The night's dampness still clings to your bones, and a monkey audacious even before dawn scampers noisily across the thatch roof above you. In the dim blue light, you roll your ledger bundle back into your cloth satchel and set off on the footpath, now slick with dew and tangled with early-season fern growth. It's the second month of the lean season. Fewer travelers pass through the highland paths now, and even the traders, who usually come clinking with brass weights and clattering ox carts, have gone quiet. Yet in their absence, something else stirs. In a small hilltop hamlet called Andley, you find a new kind of stillness. No one meets you at the edge of the clearing. The sacred drums are silent. Only the birds and bees acknowledge your arrival. You know the pattern. Either a death or a quarrel. You find it's both. A young woman named Ratna has died. She was 17 and newly married. The old women say she drank too much fresh mahua one morning, eager to impress her in-laws, and then fell asleep near the drying stones, where the smoke from the fermenting ovens was thick and acrid. She never woke up. Some whisper it was poison. Others say the tree spirits were displeased. You sit beside the village headman, an old man named Buyua, who chews dried turmeric and stares at the ground. He says little. No one brings you tea. No one mentions tribute. You don't ask. Instead, you stay the night. In the moonlight, the villagers gather at the grove, each bringing an offering: a strip of cloth, a handful of rice, a flower. No prayers are spoken. Only silence and the creak of trees swaying in the windless air. You wonder if this is what justice feels like in these forests. Not punishment, but remembering. The next morning, Buwa walks with you as you leave the village. He doesn't talk until the edge of the sal grove. They'll come again soon, he says, with more books. You nod. They want more records. Buju spits a stream of turmeric onto the path. They want more numbers, but not more trees. That. You cannot argue. By the time you reach the lowland outpost of Pachpani, 2 weeks later, your satchel is heavier, not from tribute, but from stories. At each village, you've begun to see the same pattern. The forest gives less. Not dramatically, not yet, but less. A string of mild monsoons, more feral pigs, erratic winds. And with every shortage, the pressure rises: more scribes, more officials, more counting. The Maratha Subadar who oversees the regional tribute office summons you to a small veranda and offers you line water and a polite but unmistakable warning. We have received word, he says, that in some districts, headmen are underreporting Mahiwa harvests. You meet his gaze. Some trees bear late, some not at all. He waves a fly away. And yet silver trade with plains merchants has increased. We think the villagers are selling off what should be reported as tribute. You take a slow sip from the clay cup. If so, it is not for luxury. It is for salt and thread. He taps his fingers against a scroll on his lap. Perhaps, but we need correct records. You nod. That is all he wants. Back in your hut that night, you unroll your ledger and stare at the grooves. You can make them say anything. That's the truth no one likes to say aloud. A longer mark, a double knot, a crossed-out token. These speak louder than ink, and yet you try to make them honest. Not mathematically honest, perhaps, but forest-honest. Your mentor, long dead now, once told you, the forest doesn't lie. It just forgets to explain itself. You think about that when you meet a young woman named Baya in a clearing near Pandra. She's making a paste of fermented mahiwa and tamarind seeds, spreading it onto flat stones to dry. Her hands move quickly, expertly. She tells you the recipe is from her grandmother, and that it helps with belly sickness in the wet season. Have you written it down? You ask. She laughs. Why write it? I can make it. You nod. But, she adds, I'm teaching my daughter. She's 5. She already knows how to stir without burning it. You smile, thinking of your own daughter. She's married now, living 2 hill ranges away. In the Ministry of You haven't seen her where you occasionally assist with court copying. You meet a colleague named Wei Li, a man with ink-stained fingers and an unusual knowledge of antique bedding. One afternoon, over sesame pastries, he confides in you. Haven't truly slept since the year of the locusts. You blink. That was 4 years ago. Wei Li nods, solemn. Yes, since then, my soul has been lopsided. He produces from his satchel a curious booklet bound, not with thread, but knotted hemp cord. The cover reads, The Sighing Pillow, a study of asymmetrical dreams. Inside are diagrams of beds tilted at odd angles. One page suggests elevating the left side of the bed frame by 1 kun, roughly an inch, to discourage spiritual reflux. Another recommends sleeping with one earlobe folded inward, to trap intrusive thoughts. You ask if any of it has worked. Wei Li shrugs. Hard to say. But at least I'm doing something. There is comfort, it seems, in method. Around this time, rumors circulate of an imperial concubine who hasn't slept in months. Lady Kiyu of the Blue Lotus Chamber, once favored by the emperor for her compositions on moonlit solitude, has reportedly taken to wandering the palace gardens at night, murmuring Tang poetry to the plum blossoms. The court astrologers are consulted. Her bedding is replaced with silk from Nanchang. A Taoist priest is brought in to chant at the foot of her bed. Nothing works. Then, one morning, she is found napping peacefully in a lacquered storage closet, her head resting on a stack of unused imperial proclamations. Word spreads quickly. Within the week, several ministers have voluntarily slept in closets, claiming structural serenity. A new scroll appears at the markets, attributed to an anonymous court scribe, titled simply, "On the Utility of Small Spaces for the Reconciliation of Inner Winds." You find a copy and read it slowly. It recommends sleeping in a location too narrow for ambition to enter. Su Zhang, intrigued by the turn of events, proposes a new experiment, a sleeping platform built within your kitchen storage alcove. He furnishes it with a reed mat, a red clay teapot, and a copy of Cloud Dream Sutras, a Buddhist-inspired text that suggests dreams are the body's rehearsals for forgetting. At first, it feels strange, cramped, undignified, even childlike, but in that closet-sized alcove, without the long gaze of windows or the echo of your neighbor's humming, something changes. Your breath settles more quickly. Your thoughts no longer pace back and forth. You begin to sleep deeply. You dream of inkstones, sinking gently into water. That you wake with the strange certainty that your body has been listening to the walls. Later, Su Zhang nods in approval. The body is a stubborn scroll, he says. Sometimes it folds best when the edges are pressed. But he also warns you, dreams may become more vivid now. Watch carefully. He adds, for the dreams that speak without symbols, you're not sure what he means. But one night, a new dream begins to arrive. In it, you are walking through a vast library. The shelves stretch forever, and every scroll is blank until you touch it. Then the words appear, but they are always in someone else's handwriting. Excellent. Let's conclude Story 2 with Section 3, bringing the forgotten sleep culture of Imperial China to its gentle, dreamy close. The winter lanterns have begun to appear in Chang'an. Small, red-orange globes stitched with gold thread and suspended from thin bamboo arms. They bob along side streets and palace corridors like drifting stars. It is the season of long nights now, of charcoal fires and clay braziers, of steam curling from rice bowls, of silence that settles deeper than sleep itself. You've grown used to the quiet rhythm of your closet bed. The tight walls, once unfamiliar, now seem to cradle your thoughts, keeping them warm and contained. Even your neighbor's nocturnal humming has become a kind of lullaby, a distant reminder that other minds, too, are wandering in the dark. What once seemed like a personal defect, your inability to fall asleep, has become a path into a different kind of attentiveness, a softer way of moving through the night. As the nights stretch longer, you begin noticing subtle signs that sleep, in the Tang dynasty, is more than bodily rest. It is also an archive, a quiet, collective practice of memory. Your physician Su Zhang introduces you to a curious belief held by certain mountain hermits in Sichuan, that each person dreams not only for themselves, but also on behalf of others. Sometimes, Su says, as he grinds lotus root into powder, your mind is merely hosting the dreams of a distant cousin or a wandering ghost. It is a strange thought, but it fits with what you've read in the newer manuals, the ones surfacing quietly in the West Market. Some of these scrolls have no author, only titles. The Gentle Hour of Second Sleep, Conversations Between the Heart and Liver at Midnight, 20 Breaths Before Dawn. They speak of sleep as a communal act. According to one, the empire itself can fall sick if its people's dreams drift too far from each other. Another claims that when enough scholars dream of water, the river gods awaken. You find that one particularly beautiful at the Ministry of Rites. Your friend Wei Li begins documenting his dreams in a small bamboo-bound notebook. He claims to have seen the emperor walking through an empty library in his sleep, a vision not unlike your own. You tell him about your recurring dream of blank scrolls that fill with strange handwriting. He nods, unsurprised. Perhaps we are dreaming the same shelf. That evening, Su Zhang returns with a weathered manuscript titled Night-Clearing Rituals of the Late Han, preserved only in fragments. It describes an ancient ceremony once performed by city clerks during solstices men, who stayed awake until just before sunrise, reciting names of forgotten ancestors while warming their fingers over copper lamps. The ritual was not for insomnia. The text insists, but to remember what dreams had been lost during periods of drought or war. You wonder, do we ever truly know what we forget while we sleep? As the new year approaches, Chang'an fills with festival noise drums, acrobats, poetry contests, paper animals tossed into wells for luck. Sleep is harder to find in these noisy nights, but you no longer mind. You've become a kind of sleep. Historian, now one who watches the empire's dreams from within its smallest corners. Sometimes, you wake in the early hours, long before the rooster cries, and sit silently at your window. You sip warm chrysanthemum tea, letting the scent drift into your nose, and listen to the stillness between gongs. In these moments, you find yourself wondering what the empire dreams about. What did the grand ministers dream the night before the Silk Roads opened a new route? What did Lady Qiyu dream on the floor of the storage closet? What does Su Zhang dream after measuring your pulse and drying his herb jars? And when all of Chang'an sleeps, when the rice merchants, scroll copyists, camel drivers, temple monks, and ghost priests are all still, do their dreams align? Does the empire become whole for a moment, in sleep? One final night, as frost settles on the courtyard stones, Su Zhang presents you with a gift. A small wooden box, lacquered red and tied. With hemp string. Inside is a custom scroll. He has written it himself, the method of sleeping without expectation. Its instructions are brief. Prepare no bed. Hold no posture. Breathe not with the lungs, but with the hour itself. Let sleep arrive as a guest you do not expect. Forget you are waiting. Read it, then fold it gently. That night, for the first time in years, you fall asleep without ritual, tea or scrolls. You do not dream of libraries or herons or drifting stars. You simply sleep, and in doing so, you join thousands of others across the empire, tax clerks and brick carriers, flute makers and grain counters, each floating quietly through the silk of the dark, warmed by the slow collective exhale of a world that has finally allowed itself the forgotten sleep manuals of imperial China. You lie on a narrow, low-railed wooden bed, lacquered smooth with time and cooled by a woven bamboo mat. Around you, the candle flickers as shadows dance against the painted paper walls. The dew air smells faintly of sandalwood and ink. Outside, a courtyard pond gurgles beneath a moonlit sky, and from somewhere across the city wall, a night watchman's gong echoes distantly, one soft strike every half hour. You are in Chang'an, capital of the Tang dynasty, year 823 CE, and you are wide awake. Your physician, a quiet man named Su Zhang, has recently prescribed a sleeping regimen drawn from one of the many hand-copied manuals that circulate in learned circles across the empire. These are not religious tracts or poetic treatises, but rather a curious genre of practical health guides known as yang shu shu, nourishing life texts. They detail, in patient brushstrokes, how best to live, digest, breathe, urinate, bathe, and perhaps most importantly sleep. According to the Pillow Book of Gentle Winds, a Tang-era scroll copied in your district, optimal sleep requires 4 principles: quiet lungs, soft feet, no ghosts, no rice. The first 3 are sensible enough. The fourth, that eating rice too close to bedtime can trap dreams in the stomach, is, at the very least, memorable. Su Zhang insists on routine. He begins your evenings with a foot soak in chrysanthemum water, followed by light scraping of the heels with a ceramic spoon. You are forbidden to eat pork after the second bell, must drink only lukewarm barley tea, and are encouraged to recite calming poetry aloud while facing due east. The bed, he says, must face south. The pillow should be firm, made from millet hulls or dried jujube seeds. If your thoughts become too noisy, you are to chew on a piece of sun-dried ginger. Then roll onto your right side and imagine your spleen blooming with moonlight. You have tried this. It is less restful than it sounds. The Tang dynasty, despite its elegance and artistic brilliance, is an empire full of poor sleepers. Insomnia, restlessness, and troubling dreams are so common among the bureaucratic class that sleep manuals are often gifted along with scroll weights and inkstones. One high-ranking censor, unable to fall asleep for a decade without wine, famously commissioned a moonlit pagoda in his garden to house his dreams until he could find them again. The physician Sun Simo, called the king of medicine by later dynasties, devoted entire chapters of his medical encyclopedia to the art of peaceful rest. He advised retiring no later than the fourth drumbeat of the night watch, and warned that too much candlelight could agitate the liver. For the well-read aristocrat, a proper night's sleep became as much a ritual as calligraphy. Quiet tea, warm socks, a cooling stone placed at the center of the chest to pacify the heart fire, and yet still, so many could not sleep. Some blamed spirits, others too much poetry. You, however, suspect the problem lies in the walls. Your neighbor, a low-ranking official in the Court of Weights and Measures, has recently taken up midnight scroll copying. He hums while he writes. It is a tuneless hum, deeply irritating. The more he hums, the more awake you feel. Suzhong prescribes another scroll, The 8 Positions of the Serene Goose, an illustrated diagram of sleeping postures meant to mimic wild birds. The heron rests deeply, it reads, but the goose floats even in dreams. You are to tuck one leg under the other and curl your fingers near your chest in what appears to be a meditative nap-fist. This posture results in a strained hip and a feeling of vague personal failure. You switch to the heron. Still no sleep. 1 afternoon, while seeking shade at the West Market, you come across a bookseller with a curious collection of unsold scrolls. Among them is a work titled Dreaming the River Still, attributed to a monk named Jujin who once fell asleep for 6 years in a temple alcove and awoke with a full beard and a complete theory of nocturnal harmony. The monk's method is disarmingly simple. Step 1. Breathe with the solace of your feet. Step 2. Allow your eyes to become wet with forgetfulness. Step 3. Pretend to sleep so thoroughly that your soul believes you. You find this poetic, if unscientific. Still, that night, you try it. You lie very still. You breathe downward. You pretend to sleep with great conviction. And strangely, at some point, you do. You awaken at dawn to the chirp of a meadowbird and the slow creak of cartwheels beyond the courtyard gate. You feel calm, light, as though your bones have softened overnight. Suzhong is pleased. He notes it in his journal and nods solemnly. Perhaps, he says, we have nourished your spleen after all. You do not correct him. Instead, you sip your barley tea and wonder, what did the rest of the scroll say? Did Jujin's theory go deeper? What happens if you pretend not just to sleep, but to live each waking hour as though already in a dream? The night air in Chang'an is thinner now. Autumn has set in with an almost ceremonial precision. Courtyards are swept twice daily, and the leaves of the scala trees drift in slow spirals through the air, landing gently on inkstone lids and teacup rims. Your physician, Suzhong, has begun burning dried tangerine peel near the sleeping area, citing its wind-dispersing qualities, though you suspect he simply enjoys the smell. You've now tried 7 different sleep postures, 2 hand scrolls on breathing, and 1 dream chart copied from the northern provinces. Each has had varying levels of success. Your neighbor continues to hum, but you are beginning to understand something. Sleep, in Tang China, is not merely a physical act, it is a cultural performance. Sleep is recorded in logs and scrolls. It is painted in murals. Entire chapters of the classic of internal medicine are dedicated to it. Sleep is regarded as a barometer of the body's harmony, especially among government clerks, merchants, and scholars. Good sleep implies good balance. And balance implies a properly regulated household. This means there are consequences when one cannot sleep, especially for the upwardly mobile. A restless magistrate might be quietly reassigned. A mid-level tax inspector who nods off during a court hearing might find his rice stipend reduced. And heaven forbid a palace tutor be seen yawning near a scroll of poetry. He may be required to undergo ritual bathing and a full pulse reading. You begin to understand why sleep manuals flourish in these times. There's the pillow companion for the anxious clerk, which recommends sprinkling crushed orchid root between. The bedding to soothe ambition. There's quieting the five spirits, a nocturnal commentary, which explains in dense prose how to bribe each of the five restless souls said to inhabit the sleeping body. And then there's Night Stars and Liver Heat, a more straightforward guide that offers sleep advice based on astrology and current temperature. According to that last scroll, your trouble may stem from the fact that Venus is bright this month, and your liver is probably smoldering. Sujong prescribes steamed radish soup, incense-scented room with lotus columns and painted ceilings. You feel out of place, surrounded by men in gold-threaded belts and perfumed hair. Still, you speak plainly, offering a summary of what the numbers suggest. Lower reserves than expected, uneven distribution, possibility of spoilage due to damp jars. They listen. Not attentively, perhaps, but enough to scribble notes on a straka and nod gravely. You are thanked with a small jug of fig wine and a handful of carob pods. That night, you sit by your doorway and look out at the moonlit rooftops of Antanu. You think about Nesman's letter again, about how knowledge passes person to person, like barley from sack to sack, and how rarely the world seems to change. Unless someone dares to weigh an idea the same way they weigh wheat. You begin drafting a reply to Nesman. It's short and careful. Your method intrigues me. Here, the winds have changed, and so has the count. I wonder if the river would care to be measured this way. You don't send it yet. You fold the papyrus and place it beside your private ledger, which now contains a full page of meteorological notes and crude sketches of wind symbols. A strange feeling passes through you, not pride, not quite hope either, but something like relevance. Still, you hesitate. Would anyone in Antanu listen to a man who records goats and onions for a living? Could your observations really shift how tax is calculated, how fields are assessed, how lives are managed? You stare at the flickering lamplight and wonder, what gives weight to a number? Is it the grain it measures or the man who writes it? Down, you rise earlier than usual. The air in Antanu is still and heavy, no breeze, no bird song, not even the scrape of donkey carts along the avenue of sycamore trees. It's one of those rare mornings when everything holds its breath. You take it as a sign, though you're not sure of what. Perhaps of an ending, or a beginning. This will be your last season in the mudbrick office. Not by force, no illness, no decree, no scandal, just time. You are older now. Your beard has thinned and your joints whisper unpleasant things each time you kneel to shelve the papyri. But more than that, a feeling has taken root, a kind of quiet closure. You've begun preparing your replacement, a bright-eyed youth named Irenaeus. He's not related to you, but he has the same patient hands and an unusual fondness for reeds and ledgers. You teach him the dullest details first. How to clean the inkstone with vinegar, how to fold linen ledgers without fraying the edges, how to store scrolls so the ants don't find the glue. He listens, scribbles notes, and asks too many questions. You don't mind. One day, he asks about the private ledger you keep hidden under your mat. You consider brushing it off, telling him it's just old scraps, but something stops you. Maybe it's time. You hand it to him wordlessly. He opens it slowly, studying the neat rows of symbols and squiggles. Wind charts? He asks, puzzled. You nod. And observations? Just little things, patterns I noticed. He flips through pages that record years of mundane detail. When the river crested too early, when goats were born late, when barley spoiled from damp winds. He looks impressed in a way only someone young and eager can manage. I've never seen anything like this. No one has, you reply softly. Most of it isn't useful. He frowns. But some of it might be. You say nothing. He returns the book. In the final weeks of your tenure, you're invited once more to the temple storeroom. A newer scribe has found inconsistencies in the seasonal records. You already know what's gone wrong. A recent grain shipment was recorded using a different weight system. One of the scribes from Alexandria prefers bronze weights to limestone. It's a bureaucratic quirk, but a costly one. You resolve it in an afternoon. No one thanks you directly. But 2 days later, a basket of dried apricots and a clean reed brush arrive at your doorstep. You take this as sufficient gratitude. On your final working day, the townspeople do not gather. There's no ceremony, no procession, no garland of figs. Your retirement is marked only by your careful sweeping of the mud-brick floor and the slow extinguishing of the oil lamp. You leave your scrolls in neat stacks. The private ledger you take with you. As you walk home through the dusty lanes, you pass the bakery, the temple, the quiet field where oxen sometimes graze between seasons. You see children playing with clay dolls and hear a woman singing a grain-grinding chant that's older than Rome itself. This city has always run on rhythms that don't notice individual hands, and yet, 2 seasons later, while visiting the market, you overhear a conversation between 2 younger scribes. They're discussing wind records and irrigation levies. One mentions an experimental system of tax adjustments tied to flood levels and prevailing winds. They cite it casually. The Antonu method, they call it. You say nothing. You buy your honey and move on. Back home, you open your private ledger. Once again, you write no more calculations, just one short line in careful demotic script. The wind, like the pen, changes little by little. You fold the cloth cover, tuck it into the reed basket beneath your sleeping mat, and sit beside the open window, where the breeze rustles the papyrus plant in your courtyard. You think about barley, about ledgers, about the weight of a lifetime, of quiet numbers. And somewhere in the dust of history, perhaps one of those numbers written in dull ink by a man with tired eyes, still where time moves slowly, and history unfolds like a soft breeze across forgotten landscapes. In this about 3-hour journey through the quiet corners of the past, you'll meet a Japanese peasant who tells time with geese, a Roman servant with a calendar made of bread, and many more hidden figures history nearly left behind. These aren't tales of war or glory, but of soup pots, sleeping mats, and the slow wisdom of daily life. Settle in, close your eyes, and drift into the overlooked details that shaped the world. One quiet moment at a time, let's start the journey. Story 1. The Linen Ledger of Antonu, an ancient Egyptian accountant's life. You are standing in the narrow shade of an acacia tree, its sparse leaves trembling in the dry morning breeze of Antonu, an administrative town on the east bank of the Nile, built by Hadrian, long after Cleopatra's dynasty crumbled. The year is approximately 274 CE. The air is warm already, and the scent of baking clay, donkey sweat, and recently ground barley wafts gently through the dust-hushed streets. It's the kind of place you wouldn't think to write about, unless, of course, your job was to count things. Your name is Phanasis, a mid-ranking accountant for the local granary. Not an elite scribe, not a lowly field worker. Somewhere in between. A linen-robed man who tracks barley by the cubit and goat hair by the bundle. You sleep in a single-room home next to your sister's family, and you own 2 sandals and a small reed mat. Your office? A mud-brick chamber with a surprisingly tidy wooden shelf, a chipped ceramic inkwell, and a reed pen that never quite holds enough ink. The morning starts with the same ritual it has, for the past 12 years, dusting the papyri. Some are recent receipts for piglet purchases or barley rations. Others are yellowed rolls from decades ago, still important because they haven't yet been declared irrelevant by Alexandria's prefecture. You hum a temple hymn under your breath. Not because you're pious, but because it helps you remember the sequence of grain weights per district. As the sun rises higher, the first visitors arrive. A man with a chipped tooth brings 2 goats and says they're partial payment for a debt. You write this down without looking at the goats. He complains about last year's harvest. You nod politely. The same complaint every season. Next is an older woman with calloused feet and a basket of onions meant for the temple's kitchen, but needing official notation nonetheless. You record each onion by estimate, making a mark on a folded linen ledger you reuse for quick calculations. You've washed it so many times, the numbers fade with every rinse. And then there's the matter of audit. Twice a month, another clerk, Timon, who always smells like fish, arrives to check your scrolls. He's younger, ambitious, and possibly less accurate, but his uncle works in Oxyrhynchus, so you're careful with your ledgers. You prepare early, scrolls aligned, ink diluted, and a small basket of dates placed on the bench for hospitality. You've learned that auditors are kinder when chewing, but it's not only scrolls and barley that occupy your time. Occasionally, you're called to witness contracts, dowries, land transfers, sometimes declarations of divorce. You are a witness because you write clearly and because you don't gossip. You record that Ammonius has given his daughter 7 talents of wheat and 1 loom as part of her marriage. You don't know the groom, but you've heard he's too fond of date beer. You say nothing. In the quiet moments between transactions, you consider your own future. You have no sons, and your daughter is already married to a potter who lives upriver. You wonder often whether your records, these neat lines of symbols and measures, will mean anything after you're gone. You've begun to make a private ledger of everything: the price of dried figs last summer, the name of the cat who lives on your roof, the day the Nile failed to rise. You store this in a linen pouch beneath your sleeping mat. You've told no one. Today, you receive a visit from a traveler. She says she's from Syene and carries a letter sealed with red wax. The letter, addressed to you, is written in a hand you half recognize, a former apprentice who left for Alexandria 5 years ago. The apprentice, Nesman, writes of a new method for calculating irrigation tax using weather patterns. You read the letter twice, heart slowing with each pass. You wonder what it would mean to implement such a thing in sleepy Antanu. You look around the office, the ledgers, the grain sacks, the dried-up pot of honey someone gifted you last Epiphany. Could this new method change anything here? The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the reed mat floor. You light a small oil lamp, not because you need to work, but because the flicker feels familiar, safe. You fold the letter and tuck it inside your private ledger. Outside, the sound of a donkey braying mixes with the calls of children playing. You begin to close the ledgers for the day, brushing sand off the papyri with gentle care. And yet, as you place the last scroll on the shelf, you can't help but wonder what happens to all the barley you've ever counted. Where does it all go? The next morning, the wind shifts slightly cooler than usual. A desert wind, not strong, but enough to stir fine dust into the air. You, Phanesis, are already awake. The narrow streets of Antanu are still dark, though pale light has begun to trace the flat rooftops. You sit cross-legged on your reed mat, running a finger over the folded linen ledger that holds your private notes and the letter from Nesman, your former apprentice. The letter unsettles you, not because it proposes anything radical, but because it offers change disguised as a solution. The suggestion to calculate irrigation tax using observed weather patterns sounds sensible, perhaps even elegant. But you live in a place where elegance is not a daily concern. Here, the work is practical. dirt under fingernails. Papyrus worn smooth from handling. Goats that arrive unannounced. Still, the idea stays with you. You dress simply linen kilt. A plain sash. No jewelry today, not even the tiny bone pendant your wife once gave you. You feel the weight of something different. Possibility, perhaps, or discomfort. Maybe both. Your first visitor is a farmer named Peharu, an older man with cracked heels and a voice like ground stone. He brings 2 sacks of barley, both slightly underweight. You don't mention it. He knows. You both know. This year's yield has been poor, and the fields near the canal yielded more reeds than grain. You record the payment as partial, and dip your reed pen into the ink with exaggerated care. As Peharu leaves, he pauses at the threshold. The sky is wrong this year, he mutters. The wind is all backwards. You nod. He's right. The birds have been flying strange routes too, but you write none of this down. These aren't official observations. They are things one says aloud and leaves hanging in the air. Later, a colleague arrives from the southern side of town. Theodotus, a quiet man who manages the storerooms for the temple bakery. You've always liked him. He walks with a limp and carries a small wax tablet in his belt. You speak over lentil cakes and wine diluted with river water. He brings word of another audit, this one less formal, from the temple itself. Someone higher up wants a comparison of barley inventories between Antonu and Hermopolis. It's a bureaucratic game, really. The numbers rarely matter as much as how they're arranged. You volunteer to prepare the list. It's tedious work, but you prefer to be the one writing the numbers. You trust your own hands. Over the next few days, you comb through your ledgers, scroll by scroll, each line a thread in a sprawling tapestry of quiet transactions. Most entries are so dull they blur together. 6 measures wheat received, account of Samtik under seal of Tahare. 1 basket lentils, blemished, not suitable for offering. 12 cubits cloth, dyed, possibly miscounted. But amid the monotony, you begin noticing patterns, not weather exactly, but correlation. The years with stronger winds in Akit, the season of inundation, seem to result in lower yields and higher tax appeals. It's not a scientific observation, but you wonder. You begin a fresh sheet of notes, hidden under your desk mat. You record wind directions, rainfall estimates, temple calendar notations. You're not even sure why. Then something unexpected happens. You are summoned to the small central temple, not as a witness this time, but as a consultant. This is unusual. You are not a priest, and you do not wear the white robes of the educated elite. But someone has been reading your ledgers. Perhaps Theodotus mentioned your precision. The head of temple records wants advice. They're planning grain allotments for next quarter, and are concerned about shortages in 2 southern districts.